Marvel. The Saga begins with Mutant. Chapter 1. New York, Manhattan. This is the most prosperous place in New York, with many high-rise buildings. Even though it is only 1962 and there are still decades before the 21st century, it is still as prosperous as later generations. Especially in the very center of Manhattan, where stands a majestic building. Next to this building is the Empire State Building in Manhattan, but in front of this majestic building, the Empire State Building pales in comparison. Stark Industrial Building. A young and handsome Asian young man is standing in an extremely dirty street at the moment, looking up at the bustling city ahead. The extremely dirty streets formed a stark contrast with the cosmopolitan city in front of us. Oh, Stark Building. Lancelot Lee looked at the Stark Industrial Building in front of him with complicated eyes, and couldn't help but smiled wryly. Is this a trip to Marvel? Lancelot is not from this world. One second he was in his living room revisiting superhero movies, and the next second, he came here. He also became a handsome Asian guy named Lancelot Lee, who is just 19 years old this year. If it was just time travel, it would not make Lancelot fall into a sluggish state, but after seeing the Stark Industrial Building next to the Empire State Building, Lancelot knew that he had time travel to the Marvel world. However, this is not something that confuses Lancelot. What really confuses him is the current time and his identity. The time now is 1962, when the two superpowers are at the peak of the Cold War, and the third nuclear war may go off at any time. If this is just the Marvel movie universe, then Lancelot doesn't have to worry about the immediate Cold War issue at all. After all, in 2008, it was the time for superheroes and supervillains to debut. Before that, there was nothing in the Marvel movie universe. Danger. If possible, this time the Cold War will subside as quickly as a bubble, and then the whole world will usher in rapid development. However, the existence of Lancelot now makes the above if become a fantasy. Because of him, is a mutant. Yes, Lancelot's current identity is a mutant who has been awakening for 3 years, which is why Lancelot judged from the beginning that this is not a pure MCU universe. Look, that freak with pink eyes is really disgusting. Do you think his pink eye disease will be transmitted to others? Mommy Fock, let's stay away. Who knows if this disease is contagious? There were waves of disgusted looks and voices around, but Lancelot was used to it. According to the memory of his predecessor, he had a happy family 3 years ago, but one night, his predecessor suddenly had a high fever, and it lasted for 7 days from that day, and the fever did not subside. The predecessor's parents tried everything, but it still didn't work. Just when they were about to give up, the predecessor's eyes suddenly changed. The originally black pupils turned blood red, like 2 rubies, and his high fever subsided, but his predecessor's parents were not happy because he recovered. Instead, because of his blood-red eyes, they fell into even greater worries. They were worried that their predecessor had some strange disease, and they were also worried about being discriminated against by the neighbors around them, so they strictly asked their predecessor to stay at home. However, paper can't always contain the fire. A neighbor's Thanksgiving gift accidentally made the neighbor discover the abnormality of the predecessor. After that, rumors about the former red-eyed stranger began to quietly rise. In this era, being an Asian originally is a target of discrimination, not to mention the pair of eyes that were identified as pink eye disease in the predecessor. The predecessor family was discriminated against because of the pink eye disease of the predecessor, and even became difficult as time went by. In just a few months, the former parents had to be forced to move out of their original place and live in the most chaotic West Midtown, which is the famous Hell's Kitchen in later generations. The environment in Hell's Kitchen is even worse. There are all kinds of desperados, criminals, gangsters, and the most stinky drug addicts. It's even worse. In just 1 year, the former parents were robbed by 2 white thugs because of an outing, and then shot dead on the spot. Losing the protection of their parents, the predecessor was truly placed in hell, abused, discriminated against, and even bullied. These people treated the predecessor like a human being treats a monster. Yes, the predecessor was regarded as a monster, a red-eyed monster. 3 years of living in hell has made the predecessor cautious and even forced to wander. However, even so, he will still be regarded as a monster. Some people even regarded their predecessors as vampires and threatened to burn them to death in order to protect the peace of the world. It's too miserable, it's really too miserable. Lancelot couldn't help but sigh while empathizing with the previous experience. The mutant among the human race is really miserable. Strictly speaking, even the predecessor didn't know that he was a mutant, and it really let Lancelot know that he was a mutant. It was 3 days ago in the memory of the predecessor. 3 days ago, 2 equally young people suddenly came to the dump where the former lived, found the former, and introduced themselves as Charles Xavier and Eric Lensher. They told the predecessor that the predecessor was a mutant, a human evolutionary at the genetic level, and they were the same kind of predecessor. And showed his variant ability to the predecessor, manipulating metal, and reading mind. Immediately, the predecessor was extremely excited. He felt that in the past 3 years, he had finally found the same kind, and was finally no longer alone. When he was about to follow them and leave, they let the predecessor show his mutant ability. And when they learned that the mutant ability of the predecessor was this pair of blood-red eyes, the two left immediately disappointed, leaving the predecessor to fend for itself. So, am I rejected by the 2 giants of mutant? Lancelot smiled bitterly again. He didn't expect that the famous Professor X and Magneto would find him, and then he was disappointed because his mutant ability was only blood-red eyes leave. Lancelot really realized the difficulties of mutants. Their own mutant genes make them incompatible with humans. But the weak mutant is not recognized by the fellow mutant brothers. It really is. Fact. Lancelot couldn't help cursing. The start of his time travel was really bad. Ding. It is detected that the host has become a mutant, and the God-level pupil technique lottery system is starting. It is detected that the host has a novice gift package, whether to receive it. Single quote. In the extremely dirty and foul-smelling streets. Lancelot looked at the system panel in front of him with great excitement. Sure enough, the traversers are systematic. And Lancelot just got his own gold finger. God-level pupil technique lottery system. According to the system's explanation, this is a lottery system specially used to draw those terrifying pupil techniques in the second dimension. Those God-level pupil techniques that exist in the second dimension. Sharing eyes, reincarnation eyes, copy eyes, evil king's true eyes, emperor's eyes, devil's eyes, magic eyes of straight death, Janjagu, etc., as long as they are in anime. Lancelot was able to extract all the pupil techniques that had appeared before, and use them perfectly. What made Lancelot even more satisfied was that the God-level pupil art lottery system only had a lottery function, and did not require Lancelot to complete tasks to obtain lottery points. Every 3 months, the system will get a secondary pupil technique lottery draw, which can draw some not very powerful but very practical pupil techniques. Or, instead of using secondary lottery draws, accumulate 4 secondary lottery draws and conduct a God-level pupil technique lottery draw. Using Sharingan and Kaleidoscope Sharingan as an example, the secondary lottery will only draw the state of 1, 2, and 3 hooks of Sharingan. Don't even think about drawing Kaleidoscope Sharing eyes. As for the God-level pupil technique lottery, you can directly draw the powerful pupil technique abilities such as Kaleidoscope Sharingan or Eternal Kaleidoscope. Simple and rude, I like it. Lancelot showed an excited smile on his face. A simple lottery system is a good system. System, get a gift package for beginners. After understanding the function of the system, Lancelot said impatiently. Ding, I am receiving the novice gift package, and I have successfully received it. Single quote. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the God-level pupil technique, Gios Absolute Command. Single quote. The sound of the system disappeared, and Lancelot felt that a new ability was being born in the blood-red eyes that were originally empty. Chirp. Vaguely, Lancelot heard a bird's song, and then a fiery red bird appeared in the center of Lancelot's blood-red eyes, like a high-ranking ruler who was about to fly. Giasa Absolute Order, from the rebellious Lelouch, is Lelouch Lampeluki's royal costume matching pupil technique. As long as he looks at each other, he can give anyone an absolute order that cannot be disobeyed. This kind of absolute order can even distort the thoughts, beliefs, will, and even the 3 views, memory, etc. of the person ordered. The power that Lelouch called the king. It turned out to be Gios. Absolute order. Lancelot was very surprised. This is Lelouch's Gios, which can be called a bug pupil technique. Its absolute command is so strong that it can even distort a person's character. Although each person can only order once, they can be issued through Gios. You must always obey my orders, which can be called a BUG level absolute order. However, The only pity is that the effect of Geas on people with a strong mind will be greatly reduced. Lancelot frowned slightly. Geas is strong. Absolutely. But the only limitation is that you can only give one command to the same target. When the command is completed, your own Geas will be invalid, and for people with strong minds such as Professor X, White Queen, etc., ability will be weakened. Hey, red-eyed yellow-skinned monkey, what are you laughing at? Just as Lancelot was immersed in the joy of getting the pupil skill Geas, a sullen voice sounded. Then in front of Lancelot, two tall white men were staring at him with mocking disgust. From the eyes of these two men, Lancelot saw the deep malice towards himself. Mommy Fock, is Johnson talking to you? Are you dumb? Or are you a red-eyed freak who has been so frightened that you can't speak? The other man said cursingly, and while speaking, he directly squeezed raising his fist. He wanted to teach the freak in front of him a good lesson. How dare you look directly at me? Cub. Lancelot's icy voice came out of Lancelot's mouth, making the two menacing white men stunned for a moment. However, after seeing Lancelot's contemptuous eyes, which seemed to be aloof and looked at the ants under his feet, Johnson's face suddenly became distorted and hideous. Huh, you freak, who are you talking about? The man named Johnson drew out his pistol angrily and shouted at Lancelot. Cub, die, stay away. Lancelot's eyes were still cold. Looking into Johnson's eyes, he directly activated Geas. In the center of Lancelot's blood-red eyes, a group of birds emitting red light fluttered up instantly, escaped from Lancelot's eyes, and flew into Johnson's eyes in an instant. Johnson was originally domineering, but his ferocious and distorted face suddenly froze. His eyes were emitting a red light that only Lancelot could see. Inside the red light was a blood-red flying bird. Of order. Under Lancelot's gaze, Johnson walked directly to the corner of the street. After getting away from Lancelot, he raised the gun in a daze, pointed it at his temple, and pulled the trigger instantly. Boom! A muffled gunshot sounded, Johnson's head burst instantly, and a pool of scarlet blood immediately sprayed all around. What did you do? The other strong white man looked at the astonishing scene in front of him at this moment, and was so frightened that he fell to the ground. Trash! Lancelot stood up, walked in front of the burly white man with an indifferent face, then pressed his right hand on the burly white man's head, violently pulled the burly white man's hair, and closed his frightened eyes. Look directly at yourself. Keep me safe until your death, son of a fool. Lancelot looked at the strong white man and gave an absolute order directly. Obey. The burly white man, who was originally scared, became extremely quiet at this moment. Under Lancelot's gaze, he slowly stood up. His eyes looked at Lancelot with incomparable enthusiasm, as if looking at the king who could control his own destiny. Ha 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 ha. Looking at the unknown strong white man standing behind him as a bodyguard, Lancelot could no longer restrain his excitement, and laughed wildly. Lancelot pressed his right hand on his right eye. Just like Uchiha laughing wildly at the fourth sister, he laughed wildly, and the laughter was full of wantonness. After 3 years of suffering, Lancelot finally ushered in a turning point in his own destiny. From now on, I will be in charge of my own destiny. Lancelot slowly walked out of the extremely dirty street. Even though his clothes were extremely shabby, his aura was like that of a crown prince, noble and elegant. Looking at his handsome face, the blood-red eyes like jewels complement his temperament. Mutant's first battle. It's time to take my throne. New York, Manhattan Airport. Lancelot, who had already changed into a black slim-fit suit and a black cloak, walked into the airport. Behind Lancelot, George, the strong white man from before, was wearing a black suit and followed step by step. After seeing the young version of Professor X and Magneto, Lancelot has realized that the current time node is in the period of X-Men. The first battle. The Black Emperor Sebastian Shaw is ambitiously trying to provoke a nuclear war between the two superpowers. The Black Emperor Shaw believes that only under the baptism of nuclear war can human beings usher in evolution, and the whole world will be destroyed by then. Only one species remains, and that is mutant. CIA agent Maura Mark Taggart, who learned of the existence of mutant, found Charles Xavier, a professor at Oxford University who was very researched on human genes at the time, to assist her in investigating mutant. However, Agent Maura never imagined that this gentle and handsome professor turned out to be a mutant. After Professor X showed his mutant ability, the CIA immediately secretly established the X-Men base, and invited Professor X and Mystique Raven. Later, when fighting against the Black Emperor Shao, Professor X deeply felt that his own strength was insufficient. After saving Magneto, prepare to recruit troops. Hank, who has not yet become a beast, once again manufactured a brain-wave strengthening device. With the help of the strengthening device, the brain-wave of Professor X can expand half of the Earth. But now the plot has just begun, and the young Professor X and Magneto are still recruiting, successively recruiting Shockwave Alex, Siren Sean Cassidy, Darwin, Dragonfly Girl Salvador. Originally, they also invited Wolverine Logan, who was still a bone wolf at the time, but Logan scolded him directly, which can be called a famous mutant scene. My experience is similar to that of Wolverine Logan, but one is rejecting others, and the other is being rejected by others. Lancelot still remembers the surprise and excitement when the young Professor X and Magneto found him 3 days ago and said he was a mutant. Everyone wanted to be different, especially after being regarded as a pink eye disease and a red eye freak for 3 years. The feeling of finding the same kind in the predecessor is even stronger. However, it is a pity that Professor X and Magneto were disappointed when they heard that their ability was only the color of their eyes. Even the young Professor X directly invaded the brain of the predecessor without permission and saw everything about the predecessor. And the useless red eye variant ability. Professor X and Magneto rejected Lancelot's request to follow them, and simply abandoned the predecessor, leaving the predecessor alone to fend for itself. Although I understand what Professor X and the others are doing, but understanding does not mean agreeing. For Lancelot at that time, Professor X and Magneto seemed to be the light of hope, running through Lancelot's life. Hid the light. If you have never seen the light, you will not be afraid of the dark. But now the two of Professor X brutally broke the darkness, let Lancelot see hope, but ruthlessly took it away. This made Lancelot full of resentment towards the two of them. Is it the CIA X-Men base? It's really child's play. Just put the mutant there so ostentatiously. Is it because you are afraid that others will not know? When he came back to his senses, Lancelot slightly tidied up the thing on his body, which took 3 hours. I am quite satisfied with the clothes designed by well-known fashion designers. The dress worn by Lancelot was personally made by a well-known fashion designer in Manhattan, and the style was designed according to Lelouch's student clothing in Lancelot's memory. Noble and elegant, handsome. As for whether the well-known designer agrees, Lancelot, who has the Geass ability, said that no one can disobey their absolute orders. During the 3 hours of waiting for the clothes, Lancelot took a good shower, cleaned himself up, and had a good meal. Now Lancelot has transformed into a nobleman. And now, he came to the Manhattan airport, intending to go to the CIA headquarters in Virginia. The first battle was the first battle to announce the existence of Mutant, so how could Lancelot not participate? Because, this will also be the moment when Lancelot ascends the throne. Hey, yellow-skinned monkey, please show your ticket. In the check-in hall of Manhattan Airport, the airport staff Anthony stopped Lancelot with his hand, and angrily reprimanded him in a bad tone. The white supremacy theory that quietly emerged in the 1960s made this group of white people extremely arrogant and discriminated against all other races of skin. And when Anthony raised his head arrogantly and saw Lancelot's blood-red eyes, he was taken aback immediately, and then cursed loudly. Get out, you dirty freak, you are not welcome here. The ugly curses stopped abruptly, and Anthony stood there in a daze, as if he had lost his soul. Death to the fool. Lancelot looked at Anthony coldly, and then launched Geass' absolute order. Boom. Without any suspense, Anthony recovered immediately after receiving the order, then pulled out the gun from his waist, and shot himself in the head. Wow. The sudden gunshots made all the passengers who were registering in the airport and the staff in the airport look over in horror, and the whole hall fell silent instantly. Look straight at me, Cubs. Lancelot straightened the cloak gracefully all of a sudden, and said solemnly. In the process of panic, only Lancelot's voice echoed in the airport hall, making everyone look at Lancelot subconsciously. Kneel down. In Lancelot's eyes, a red bird flapped its wings, and then flew into everyone's eyes. Crash. Everyone in the hall knelt on the ground in unison, with their heads lowered, as if they were welcoming their king. Lancelot didn't even look at these kneeling people, and walked straight to a plane, ignoring the security personnel kneeling on the ground, and boarded a plane calmly. Take me to the CIA headquarters in Virginia. Sitting on the plane, Lancelot ordered. The pilot on the plane only felt in a trance for a while, and then came back to his senses. As ordered, boom, a plane roared from the airport and disappeared at Manhattan Airport, Virginia, CIA headquarters. The CIA headquarters building is where politicians and senior officials work, and it is also a hub for the entire CIA to communicate. The entire building is heavily guarded, and there are elite CIA agents and CIA armed soldiers everywhere. It can be said that even if a fly flies in, it will be found instantly. Therefore, although the CIA headquarters is placed on the bright side, no one has ever dared to make an idea here. However, today is an exception. Lancelot strolled to the front of the CIA building, looked at the security personnel here with interest, and then strode directly into the building. Crash. And Lancelot, who had just walked into the hall, was instantly surrounded by hundreds of members of the CIA's elite tactical team. They pointed their guns at Lancelot. As long as Lancelot moved slightly, they would shoot him without hesitation. Shoot. Facing dozens of guns pointed at him, Lancelot remained calm, as if the guns in front of him didn't exist at all. Who are you? Why did you enter here? A white man who was obviously the captain asked. Paul, the captain of the CIA's elite tactical team, looked at Lancelot indifferently at this moment, and when he saw Lancelot's eyes, he shuddered. It turned out to be a pair of blood-red pupils, eyes as beautiful as rubies, mysterious and beautiful. But definitely not the eyes that humans should have. This guy, what the hell is it? Captain Paul frowned, and a kind of fear rose in his heart, which was the fear of unknown existence. What is this Asian going to do? Do you think this is Chinatown? You can come and go as you please. This is an idiot, dared to break into the CIA headquarters without authorization. Idiot, fool. The staff who were originally in the hall also stopped at this moment. Looking at Lancelot who broke in without authorization, everyone's eyes seemed to be looking at an idiot, and everyone stopped to watch. Raise your hands, Captain Paul said indifferently, frowning. Soldier, relax, look into my eyes. Lancelot looked indifferent, and then pointed to his own eyes naturally under Captain Paul's puzzled gaze. Lancelot's actions made the soldiers even more nervous. They were ready for battle, and then they inevitably looked into Lancelot's eyes subconsciously. Follow my orders, soldier. Captain Paul also saw Lancelot's ruby eyes, and then he suddenly became dazed. Vaguely, he saw a flying bird with fluttering wings, flying into his own eyes from the eyes of the Asian young man, and then, where he couldn't see, the flying bird instantly covered his brain. Then Paul came back to his senses in an instant, and when he looked at Lancelot again, there was no other emotion in his eyes, only fanaticism. No, it's not just Paul, the eyes of hundreds of soldiers here have turned into fanaticism at this moment. Please do so, sir. The soldiers who surrounded Lancelot all knelt on one knee and said respectfully. Control the entire CIA building. Lancelot looked at the elite CIA team of hundreds of people and gave the Gios command. Yes, sir. After Lancelot's order was issued, this elite team showed terrifying fighting power in an instant. The 120 soldiers, divided into 4 groups, began to quickly start from the lobby on the first floor of the CIA, and quickly advanced tactically. A minute later, Paul's team sent someone to cut off the power supply of the entire building to prevent the news from being passed on, and then began to advance steadily from the first floor, and sporadic gunshots rang out between the floors. 20 minutes later, only the top floor of the CIA remained unbroken by this team in the entire building. Paul's team, every time they control a floor, will disarm the CIA agents, and then leave a few people to control the other non-combatants. Bang bang bang. The top floor of the CIA headquarters, in Senator Humphreyson's office. At this moment, Congressman Humphreyson's face was full of horror, and cold sweat was breaking out on his forehead. 20 minutes ago, he had learned that the CIA's elite tactical team had suddenly rebelled, and quickly closed the entire CIA building, blocking the CIA building from the outside world contact. As the chief executive of the CIA, Congressman Humphreys was horrified to find that he was trapped and died here. Now there are only a few high-level CIA members who came to the meeting and more than 20 elite CIA agents left beside Congressman Humphreys. Relying on these more than 20 CIA agents, they barely resisted the attack outside the door, but Congressman Humferson knew that with these CIA agents alone, sooner or later they would be broken by the elite squad outside. "Paul, are you crazy? Why did you rebel?" Senator Humferson yelled at the soldiers outside the door angrily. "Mr. Humferson, we have never rebelled, and we have always followed the orders of the commander." In the corridor on the top floor, Paul Mutant, who was fully armed, said seriously while making tactical arrangements for other soldiers. "Mary Falk, which fool ordered you to capture the CIA headquarters?" Counselor Humferson roared angrily. He couldn't understand whose order Captain Paul was following when he said to obey the officer's order. "I am Senator Humferson, the supreme officer here. I have the right to order you to immediately stop your attack and surrender," Senator Humferson said to the soldiers outside the door with a stern voice. "I'm very sorry, Senator Humferson, you don't have the authority to order us, only the chief can order us," Paul said earnestly and frantically, and then a soldier kicked open the door in front of him. Bang bang bang. In the room, more than 20 detectives fired rapidly at the moment the door was kicked open, and blood holes appeared on the heavily armed soldiers. "Die for the commander." The soldier who had been beaten into a sieve seemed to have a group of fiery red birds burning in his eyes at this moment. He shouted incomparably frantically, and then directly ignored the pain on his body and raised his gun to shoot. Bang bang bang. There was a lot of gunfire, and in a short period of time, this extremely fanatical soldier killed more than a dozen CIA agents, and then gradually lost his life, and his whole body collapsed to the ground. "Serve the commander to death." Paul Mutant rushed in with a group of elite squads. After seeing the dead soldiers, he immediately saluted the soldiers, and then roared with the same fervor. "Surrender, we surrender." Seeing this group of extremely fanatical soldiers, Senator Humferson immediately raised his hands and knelt down on the ground with his head in his hands. Tap, tap, tap. When Congressman Humferson looked at the ground in horror, he suddenly saw someone walking towards him. Member Humferson, the chief executive of the CIA. Lancelot stopped in front of Mr. Humferson, looking down at Mr. Humferson with blood-red eyes, as if looking down on the ants under his feet, and murmured mockingly, "Cub, raise your head." Looking at the trembling Senator Humferson, Lancelot shouted coldly. Counselor Humferson raised his head in horror, and immediately saw a pair of ruby-like eyes, and a red bird flying out of them. "Obey my orders until the end of your life." Lancelot didn't have any nonsense, and directly issued an absolute order to Senator Humferson. "Obey." Under the absolute order, the trembling eyes of Congressman Humferson became frenzied, seeing Lancelot's gaze, as if looking at the president. In just 20 minutes, the CIA headquarters has been completely controlled by Lancelot. In a secret research base in Virginia, a supersonic plane landed slowly. Lancelot got off the plane, and then he saw Congressman Humferson with a flattering smile on his face. "Sir." Senator Humferson walked up to Lancelot respectfully, bowed and saluted, his eyes full of respect. "How is the construction of the base going?" Lancelot glanced at Humferson and asked. "Sir, fortunately, the mutant evolution home base you requested has been built." Humferson nodded, and began to lead Lancelot into the base that had been prepared for a month. A month ago, after Lancelot used Gios power to control Senator Humferson, he used Gios to force the entire CIA building and all CIA agents on missions in 3 days. The entire CIA, together with all the agents on missions, were easily controlled by Lancelot. The CIA intelligence system completely serves Lancelot alone. After taking full control of the CIA, Lancelot issued an order to build a secret base for himself, and the entire CIA immediately began to operate efficiently. In just 1 month, Lancelot's order was perfectly executed. Lancelot walked into this base hidden in the depths of the forest. The entire base has the file size of hundreds of football fields, almost hollowing out the entire underground forest. The entire underground base is divided into living areas, training areas, research areas, etc. and other facilities. Countless people are busy in the entire underground base at the moment. Most of these people are the ace agents of the CIA, as well as the most elite tactical team and logistics support personnel of the CIA. But now, each of them has been turned into a state of death under the control of Senator Humferson, and they were secretly sent here to work for Lancelot. Definitely, there are also the top scientists in the world that Lancelot ordered the CIA agent to secretly convene, and the largest number are scientists in genetics. Okay, everyone put away the research in their hands. After arriving at the base, without Lancelot's instructions, Congressman Humferson had already summoned all the scientists. He summoned these scientists into a specially built hall, then bent down respectfully, and personally led Lancelot to stand on the highest stage of the hall. Standing on the high platform, Lancelot, wearing a luxurious robe, looked down at the scientists below. He could see doubts, confusion, astonishment, and fear in the eyes of these scientists. Most of these scientists were kidnapped by CIA agents by force, within the base. Although the scientific research equipment here is very complete, these scientists are anxious all day long and have no intention of researching at all. At this moment, the group of scientists looked at Lancelot standing on the high platform, and they were surprised. Obviously, they did not expect that the chief executive of this secret base turned out to be an Asian, and his eyes. "Serve me as Lord until death." Lancelot didn't pay attention to the inner thoughts of these scientists. In his blood-red eyes, a huge amount of fiery bird appeared. The bird sang, and then rushed into the eyes of all the scientists, subsequently rewriting their thinking. In front of Gios, no matter what kind of thoughts these people have, it is useless. Lancelot can easily stamp their thoughts on them. "I will die for my husband, and I will die until I die." The scientists in the high platform were left with fanaticism after Gios, and they said in unison, "Very good, let's continue your previous research." Lancelot nodded in satisfaction, then walked off the high platform, and under the leadership of Senator Humferson, he turned around the entire base. After walking out of the base again, Lancelot finally couldn't help laughing wildly again. Gios is indeed invincible. After laughing wildly, Lancelot regained his composure, then glanced at the dozen or so CIA executives following him, and gave the order indifferently. "Forget everything about the House of Mutant." As soon as Lancelot finished speaking, the eyes of more than a dozen CIA executives suddenly showed confusion. The Gios in their minds directly erased all their memories of the secret base. For people who have been hit by Gios, erasing memory is just a matter of Lancelot's order. Absolute order can forcibly modify a person's memory, character, thought, and even will. Erasing memory is the easiest thing to do. "Humferson, how are my fellow mutants doing?" After boarding the supersonic plane, Lancelot sat on the luxurious sofa seat, looked at the clouds outside, and said casually, "Sir, Professor X, Charles Xavier and Magneto Eric Lensher are still constantly looking for Hellfire Club's Black Emperor Shaw." Humferson stood respectfully in front of Lancelot and reported in detail. "Still looking for Shaw's trace. Their movements are slower than I imagined." Lancelot frowned slightly, and tapped the table with his right hand. After taking control of the CIA, Lancelot has been paying attention to the situation of the X-Men base secretly formed by the CIA. But it is a pity that the plot of the first battle of Mutant is still in the transition period. The young Professor X and Magneto are still flying around the world to track down the conspiracy to destroy the Hellfire Club. It should be 2 months before Black Emperor Shao invaded the X-Men base in the final battle on the small island. 2 months, that is to say, at the time of the decisive battle, I was just able to conduct a secondary pupil draw. Lancelot said with a smile on his face, thinking to himself. Although he has obtained the Gios Absolute Order, with the horror of the Absolute Order, he can even easily imprint a thought stamp into anyone's brain. However, Lancelot knows that although Gios is very strong, it still has weaknesses. To activate Gios, the opponent needs to look directly into his eyes. If they cannot look directly into his eyes, then Gios will not be effective. And besides Gios, his body is too weak, just the body of an ordinary person. Even with a pistol, he can easily kill himself. That's why, knowing that this is the first battle of Mutant, Lancelot still didn't rush to the X-Men base. "Have Wolverine Logan and Sabertooth Victor been found?" "I'm very sorry, sir, we didn't find any trace of Wolverine Logan, but Sabertooth Victor, we have already found it." Humferson apologized with guilt on his face. "It's not particularly trash." Lancelot gave Humferson a cold look, and said indifferently. He had assigned the task of finding Wolverine Logan and Sabertooth Victor a month ago, but until now, a month later, the CIA agents only found traces of Sabertooth Victor. Charles Xavier's brain-wave strengthening device is really too slow. It seems that after taking control of Sabertooth, I still have to go to Base X. Canada, Rocky Mountains. This mountain range is undulating, thousands of kilometers long from north to south. It can be called the backbone of North America. There are few people here, dense vegetation, and many beasts. At this moment, a strong white man with a strong back and a waist of 2 meters is walking in the forest. This strong man is extremely muscular, as if cast from copper and iron, and his majestic body is even bigger than a black bear, strong. The 5 fingernails on both hands were as sharp as knives, and they looked like the sharp claws of a cat. Between breathing, there was a faint tiger-like grunt. It's the mutant Sabertooth Victor. Since Victor escaped from Howlett Manor with his mutant brother Logan in the 18th century, they have been living together and wandering around Tianya. They participated in dozens of wars, including the Civil War, World War I, and World War II. Relying on the ability of the terrifying self-healing factor and their own mutation ability, the two of them are on the battlefield. It is like cutting melons and vegetables, slaughtering human beings like entering the land of no one. The long battle allowed their mutant ability to be developed to the greatest extent. However, because of the fighting, Sabertooth Victor and his mutant brother Logan drifted away. As time went by, Sabertooth Victor began to enjoy the feeling of fighting. He was gradually affected by the wildness carried by his mutant genes, like a beast Sabertooth, eager for killing and blood. But his mutant brother, Logan, has long been tired of fighting, tired of war, and tired of his own mutant ability. Because of this, Sabertooth Victor and Wolverine Logan parted ways after World War II. Sabertooth Victor ran to the Rocky Mountains because of his desire to fight, and began to live a beast-like life. Logan, my mutant brother, I will find you and kill you. Sabertooth Victor roared with murderous intent on his face. To this day, he still couldn't forget the feeling of being abandoned by his mutant brother. He, who was already bloodthirsty, felt the killing intent towards Wolverine Logan for the first time. Roar. And just when Sabertooth Victor erupted with killing intent and roared wildly, a dull roar suddenly appeared in the forest, and then a black bear with a size of 3 meters rushed out, and then directly rushed to the strong man. Roar. Facing the pounce of the huge black bear, Sabertooth Victor's eyes turned red, and he let out a tiger's roar. Pong. A dull impact sounded, and Sabertooth Victor's body collided with the black bear, and the ground under the feet of each of them was instantly shattered. The black bear roared, and the bear's claws popped out, piercing Sabertooth Victor's shoulder instantly, and Victor also roared, and the sharp claws of both hands pierced the black bear's chest. Sir, do you want to do it now? Congressman Humferson asked excitedly in a command vehicle in front of a lake in the Rocky Mountains. It was the first time he saw such a terrifying and powerful mutant. Through the camera on the soldier in the forest, he saw the madness of Sabertooth Victor. One person and one bear just stood there like this, you scratch me, I bite you. From beginning to end, neither Victor nor the black bear dodged. With just a few claw strikes, Sabertooth Victor had more than 20 blood holes on his body, and the black bear was even more miserable. Half of his head was directly scratched by Victor, and his body was riddled with holes. The flesh and blood flew, revealing thick joints. This is not what excites Humferson the most. What really excites Humferson is the changes in Sabertooth Victor at the moment. His body is healing rapidly, and even the eyeball that was scratched by the black bear is rapidly regenerating. Although he has seen Charles Xavier's telepathy and Raven's shapeshifting ability, seeing Sabertooth's terrifying resilience like a regenerative healing factor at this moment still shocked Humferson. Do it. Lancelot looked at Victor, his eyes full of admiration for Victor. Ever since he crossed over to become a mutant, Lancelot already knew that he was completely tied to the mutant chariot. Lancelot definitely won't do that kind of stupid behavior that is clearly a mutant but sits crookedly and still thinks he is a human being. He, Lancelot Lee, is a pure, different from human mutant. As for the attitude towards humans, just like the catchphrase that Lancelot produced after awakening Geas, you can get a glimpse. Cub species. That's why, even though Lancelot had already controlled the entire CIA, he still didn't say his name. Cubs who can easily be controlled by themselves do not deserve to know their names. Yes, sir. Humferson nodded respectfully, and then conveyed Lancelot's order through the communication device. Around Victor Sabertooth, hundreds of heavily armed Special Forces soldiers were advancing steadily at this moment. All the soldiers held a specially modified rifle in their hands, and the bullets in the rifle were large-yield narcotic bombs. After learning the location of Sabertooth Victor, Lancelot ordered the CIA logistics department to make these tranquilizer bombs. 4. Just to capture Sabertooth. Whether it's Wolverine Logan or Sabertooth Victor, although they have a self-healing ability close to the regenerative healing factor, their resistance to anesthetics is not high. My God, this is a monster. As the captain of this operation, Paul Alton's eyes were full of solemnity. He looked at the humanoid monster that brutally tore the black bear in half, and said in a moment of horror. The smell of human blood. It's really a long-lost smell. Victor Sabertooth twitched his nose a few times, licked his blood-stained paw bloodthirstily, and said with a sinister smile. Whoosh! Sabertooth landed on all fours, and quickly ran towards a soldier hidden in the woods. His movements were nimble, like a tiger descending a mountain, and like a speeding car, the distance of tens of meters was fleeting. Pissed. Before a soldier could react, his chest was pierced by Sabertooth Victor, and even his heart was crushed by his sharp claws. I will serve my husband until the end of my life. The soldier whose heart had been pierced suddenly yelled wildly, and then raised the gun in his hand under Sabertooth Victor's astonished gaze. Fire! Paul Ulton didn't hesitate anymore, and directly gave the order to fire. Blah blah. In the forest, there was a burst of gunshots and roars like tigers. After a few minutes, the gunfire stopped, and the entire forest became calm again. In Virginia, in the secret base named by Lancelot as the House of Mutant Evolution, dozens of scientists looked at the test data in front of them in amazement, and couldn't help being amazed. Sir, this is really unbelievable. Mr. Sabertooth Victor's gene has undergone an ancestral evolution, which makes his body as powerful as a beast, and has the physical characteristics of a tiger-like beast. Leonard Ernest exclaimed in shock. As the top doctor of human genetics, Dr. Leonard has never seen such a complex genetic structure. Although he only conducted a preliminary analysis, the results still surprised him. The Sabertooth Victor who provided the blood gene sample can no longer be called a human being. Is this Sabertooth Victor really human? Dr. Leonard couldn't help muttering as he looked at the burly figure bound up with a special alloy in front of him. Lancelot took over the test data from Dr. Leonard. Lancelot didn't care about Dr. Leonard's exclamation and questioning, as well as the fear and research desire in his eyes, and just reached out and patted Leonard gently. Dr. Leonard, he is not a human being, but my fellow mutant. In the face of my fellow mutant, everyone should show due respect and love, because my fellow mutant is helping you human beings have blazed a new path of evolution. My fellow mutants should be respected and respected pioneers of evolution, explorers on the path of evolution, and guides of your human evolution. Quote. Lancelot's majestic and solemn voice, like a high-ranking king issuing his own decree, made all the humans in the base kneel on one knee, looking at Lancelot fanatically. Of order, sir. The fiery red flying birds in the eyes of the people in the entire base were burning, and then all the flying birds engraved what Lancelot just said in the deepest part of their minds. Thought stencil. This is a new attempt by Lancelot for Geass. Lancelot can directly burn his words into the minds of the people in the entire base through Geass, just like stamping their thoughts. All human beings will no longer be afraid of Mutant, but will respect and love Mutant from the bottom of their hearts, and will regard Mutant as the pioneer and leader of the human evolution path, just like those in the period of great voyages. Those explorers are generally bright and eye-catching. After being branded with a thought seal by Lancelot, everyone looked at Sabertooth Victor who was tied to a special alloy, and all turned into envy and longing. Mutation and glory. I don't know who said it, and then everyone in the Evolution House base began to shout from the bottom of their hearts. Roar. Fanatical shouts resounded through the base of the Mutant Evolution House, and Victor, who had been anesthetized by a large dose of anesthetic, was also awakened instantly by the sound. Victor Sabertooth was tied to a metal alloy experimental table at this moment. Looking at the unfamiliar environment in front of him, he let out an angry roar, and his whole body began to struggle crazily. Bang bang bang. Under Sabertooth Victor's struggle, the metal belts made of metal alloys began to twist and shapeshift, and the entire experimental table was shaking crazily. Let my mutant rogue be quiet. Looking at Sabertooth Victor, whose muscles were tense and intertwined like steel bars, Lancelot once again showed appreciation. This is the first powerful mutant that Lancelot found, especially Sabertooth is much stronger than Wolverine Logan's ability. Lancelot wanted to tame the tiger for his own use. As for how to tame it, is there a more suitable taming method in this world than chaos? Inject some anesthetics into our mutant brother and make him quiet. After Lancelot's order was issued, a group of scientists immediately got busy, and Dr. Leonard said even more excitedly. Roar, roar. With the injection of the anesthetic, Sabertooth Victor's body began to become weak, but even so, his roar was still breathtaking. Sabertooth Victor, my fellow mutant. After confirming that Sabertooth Victor could not break free, Lancelot walked up to Victor and looked down at the tyrannical Victor. Mutant, I'm going to kill you. Sabertooth Victor twitched his nose, and immediately smelled the same kind. He was a little quieter, but his eyes were still violent. Because of the mutant genes in his body and his long killing career, began to gradually succumb to animal nature, succumb to bloodthirsty killing, so that his brain was only filled with killing, and he couldn't think normally at all. It seems that you can't think normally for the time being. Lancelot glanced at Victor's tyrannical eyes, shook his head helplessly, and then directly activated Geas. Serve me as king, serve me as lord, and obey all my commands forever. Lancelot directly issued his absolute order, and a burning bird flew into Sabertooth Victor's eyes in an instant, and disappeared. Sabertooth Victor in rage only felt dazed for a moment. When he looked at Lancelot again, the original tyrannical gaze disappeared, replaced by incomparable respect and fanaticism, as if looking at his own king. Untie Victor. Lancelot glanced at Dr. Leonard and ordered. Dr. Leonard immediately pressed the button, and all the metal straps on the test bench were opened. Sabertooth Victor immediately roared, jumped off with a tiger pounce, and then ran quickly in the room. Mr. Protection. The security personnel at the base immediately looked at Sabertooth Victor, who was running in the room, as if he was facing an enemy, and rushed into the laboratory quickly, and then protected Lancelot. It's okay, step back. Lancelot glanced at the soldiers beside him, waved his hands lightly, and everyone retreated immediately. Sabertooth Victor appeared in front of Lancelot again after galloping around, and then knelt down on one knee with his head bowed under the eyes of everyone who was facing an enemy. My king. Sabertooth Victor's eyes were still violent, but when he looked at Lancelot, he was extremely respectful, and his voice was full of extreme fanaticism. Victor Sabertooth, you should be a noble and powerful mutant, not a bloodthirsty beast. Lancelot frowned slightly as he saw the tyranny in Sabertooth Victor's eyes. Controlled by himself, but still a bloodthirsty beast. Lancelot doesn't need a bloodthirsty beast. What he needs is a normal mutant, a mutant with normal intelligence, not a mutant who only knows how to kill. Victor, use your sanity to control your bloodlust. Lancelot issued the first Geas categorical order to Sabertooth Victor. I obey, my king. The bright red flying birds in Victor's eyes were burning, and Victor's originally chaotic brain began to become rational again under the influence of Geas at this moment. The original savage nature was replaced by Geas's absolute command, directly expelled from the body. I'm back. The tyranny in Victor's eyes receded like a tide, and his eyes became clear, as if he had just woken up from a big dream, and he murmured. Hey, brother Victor, would you like a can? On a spacious road, several heavily armed soldiers were sitting on a pickup truck, and they looked at Sabertooth Victor sitting in the middle with fiery eyes. A soldier even handed Sabertooth Victor a can of beer. Errands, thank you. Victor Sabertooth, who was sitting in the middle, nodded to the soldiers beside him with a smile on his face, and then used his fangs to bite the beer can open, and drank the beer inside in one go. Cool. Mutation, evolution, glory. Several fighters immediately cheered excitedly, and Sabertooth Victor couldn't help but feel a little lost when he saw the longing eyes of these fighters. This is called being alive. This is the honor that mutant deserves. Sabertooth Victor couldn't help clenching his fists excitedly, and then looked at Lancelot who was sitting in front of the co-pilot. His eyes were incomparable respect and fanaticism. Victor knew that his dreamlike life these days was bestowed by King Lancelot. For the first time, Victor found peace in his mind, and his mind was no longer full of killing, animalism, and savagery. It is to be able to think like a normal person, to appreciate the beauty of this world, and to be able to have one's own emotions. Similarly, Victor was respected and loved by humans for the first time, making him realize that he is not a monster, a freak. In the past few days at the Mutant Evolution House, Victor often looks back on the past, full of disappointment with his absurd killings. After waking up, looking back at his memory, he realized that it was not him, but a monster called Sabertooth. After 200 years of ignorance, I only know today that I am me. James, my mutant brother, if you see me now, you will be surprised. Sabertooth Victor looked into the distance with vicissitudes of life, with a rare smile on his face. Variation in glory. My lord, Lancelot hail. Victor Sabertooth couldn't help raising his arms and shouting, and the soldiers around him followed Sabertooth Victor with fanaticism and shouted. Sir, the X-Men base is coming soon. In the pickup truck at the moment, a CIA agent was driving while reporting to Lancelot, who was sitting in the co-pilot. Well, I see. Lancelot nodded and continued to flip through the information files in his hand. One of the documents contained various information about Mutant. On this document, Lancelot saw many acquaintances, including Professor X Charles Xavier, Magneto Eric Lenscher, and Mystique Raven. In addition to these mutants, Hellfire Club's Black Emperor Sebastian Shaw, White Queen Emma Ross, Red Devil Azazo, and Torrent Janos Quest are also impressively listed. Because of Charles Xavier's self-explosion, those politicians have already started to set up their own mutant research institutes, and even started searching for mutants all over the world. Lancelot gently closed the document. The documents on it were shocking, all about mutant research project. Although these projects have not yet been launched due to the lack of mutants, as time goes by, with the power of this superpower, it is really easy to find mutants. At that time, the only thing waiting for Mutant is to become a guinea pig in various mutant laboratories to be tortured and studied crazily. It's ridiculous that Professor X has been helping mankind fight against the Black Emperor Shao, but he didn't see that his mutant compatriots were about to be imprisoned. Lancelot said with a sneer in his eyes. Lancelot scoffed at Professor X Charles Xavier's attitude towards humans. Charles Xavier may be a qualified mutant professor, but he is not a qualified leader. He blindly compromises with human beings, even from the bottom of his heart, he still thinks that he is still a human being. It is also because of this that Charles retreats again and again in response to human beings pressing step by step, allowing human beings to arrest Mutant recklessly. In the end, Charles even the students of Xavier Talent Academy were not kept. Sir, the X-Men base has arrived. While Lancelot was recalling the actions of Professor X Charles Xavier, the future leader of Mutant, the pickup truck parked in a crude base. It was originally a secret flight base, a secret research institute for experimental supersonic aircraft, but now it has a new identity, the X-Men base. Out of distrust of Mutant, the CIA executives at the time did not prepare bases for mutants such as Charles, but simply isolated the abandoned flight base and used it as the X-Men base proposed by Charles. Lancelot got off the pickup truck, tidied his clothes a little bit, saw that there were only 3 or 2 administrators with big cats and kittens in the whole base, and a tactical team of 20 people. Lancelot couldn't help but shook his head. The defense of the base in front of him is like a child's play. Not to mention Haiwangshao, even the top human mercenaries can come and go with ease. Victor. Lancelot turned his head and called, and Sabertooth Victor jumped out of the car in time, and then stood behind Lancelot. My king, please order. Sabertooth Victor looked at Lancelot frantically, and also adjusted his black suit. His face was full of excitement, he already smelled the same kind of breath. Let's go, let's meet our mutant comrades. Lancelot walked directly into the base, and in front of Lancelot, several agents from the X-Men base quickly surrounded Lancelot. Roar! Facing the siege of agents, Sabertooth Victor immediately stood in front of Lancelot, glared at these agents, and let out a roar of tigers. Relax, Victor. Lancelot patted Sabertooth Victor on the shoulder lightly and said with a chuckle. Obey, my king. Following Lancelot's words, Sabertooth Victor immediately relaxed, and then stood respectfully behind Lancelot. Continue with your previous mission, soldier. Lancelot glanced at the soldiers surrounding him, and said indifferently. Following Lancelot's voice, these soldiers were in a daze for a moment, then they all put down their guns, passed by Lancelot, returned to their original positions, and continued their guarding tasks. But Lancelot didn't even look at these soldiers, and took Sabertooth Victor to wander around the base at leisure. At this moment, in an ordinary building in the X-Men base, the living room in the lobby on the first floor has been transformed into Mutants' party area at this moment. Inside the room, the lights were bright, several young people were releasing their vitality recklessly, and a noisy party was being held here. When Lancelot came here, he saw Salvador, the dragonfly girl, who was booed by everyone, dancing a sweet dance. Several men's eyes were shining and their faces were flushed. Mystique Raven looked at the men here with contempt, and couldn't help curling her lips and said, "Look, this is a man, whether it's a mutant or a human, it's a virtue. Hey, Raven, it's your turn to be a good-looking one." Raven, Raven, Raven. Mystique, Mystique. Several young men heard Raven's taunt, and several men immediately started booing again. They knew very well about Raven's mutant ability. It looks good. Does it look good like this? Raven drank the red wine in the glass in one gulp, and then his whole body turned into blue skin, and he looked up at his companion. Raven, don't be such a spoiler. Yeah, Raven, honestly, you scare me. After seeing Raven's blue skin, several young mutants were immediately discouraged. Even Hank, who had a crush on Raven, turned his head away at this moment. Well, what you need is a normal girl, not a blue monster. Looking at the expressions of everyone, Raven, who was smiling, lowered his head for a moment, looking at his own blue skin, Raven's gaze full of disgust. This body is simply a masterpiece of heaven, why do you dislike it? Just when Mystique Raven was depressed, a strange but full of admiration sounded in the room. The young mutants who were having a carnival all stopped their movements and looked for the sound, only to see a handsome Asian guy in a gorgeous robe standing in the room at the moment, looking at Raven with admiration. Click. After seeing the stranger, Beast Hank jumped directly from the light pipe, then turned off the light and opened the curtains in the room. The originally dark room suddenly became brighter. Who are you? Siren Sean Cassidy was already a little drunk. He looked at Lancelot with sleepy eyes, walked up to Lancelot, was stunned for a long time, and finally asked. Lancelot ignored the questioning of the young mutant siren. He only had Mystique Raven in his eyes at the moment. Lancelot directly passed Sean Cassidy and walked towards Raven. Mare Falca, I'm talking to you. Sean Cassidy, who was ignored, felt a little embarrassed, and immediately yelled at Lancelot. Pong. However, just as Sean Cassidy cursed, he saw a strong man appearing in front of him. His 2-meter-tall figure was like an iron tower, blocking him. Before he could react, his neck was strangled. Victor grabbed Sean Cassidy's neck with cold eyes, then lifted it up like a chick, and the sharp claws of his left hand gradually extended. Victor. It wasn't until this moment that Lancelot finally took his eyes off Raven and waved his hand at Victor. Boom. Under Lancelot's signal, Victor loosened Sean Cassidy's neck casually, and Sean Cassidy immediately hit the floor heavily. Are you a mutant? It wasn't until Victor released Sean Cassidy's neck that these young mutants woke up like a dream. Raven looked at Lancelot's eyes in astonishment at this moment. Those blood-red eyes were like rubies, even more dazzling than real gems. Raven lost his mind for a moment. As you can see, I am also a mutant. You can call me Lancelot, or Mr. Lancelot. Lancelot stood in front of Raven, looking at Raven's body. At this moment, Raven was covered with blue scales, and her blue skin made her look completely different from the people around her. Looking at Raven's blue body, Lancelot's eyes were full of admiration. The blue body was covered with fish scale-like lines. The scale-like lines on his body look pleasing to the eye, and compared to the body of a human female, Raven's body at this moment is graceful and varied, with a protruding front and a curved back, and his figure and flexibility surpass a human female by a large margin. What a perfect body! Lancelot admired sincerely. Mr. Lancelot, you are you talking about me? Raven heard Lancelot's sincere admiration, and looked at Lancelot a little excitedly for a while. It was the first time she heard someone compliment her blue body. Raven could see that the handsome Asian guy in front of him was a sincere compliment, which made Raven, who was extremely inferior to his appearance, full of gratitude to Lancelot. For a long time, Raven has been asked by Charles Xavier to hide her blue body to avoid causing panic among humans. Over time, Raven began to hate her blue skin, and she began to dream of having normal fair skin like a human girl. However, despite loathing her own body, Raven still wants to be recognized by others for her blue body. And now, she heard it. Definitely, beautiful girl, you shouldn't hate your body, it's so beautiful in my eyes. Lancelot gently stroked Raven's face and said sincerely. For Lancelot, Mystique Raven is a dream companion, not only because of her ability to shapeshift to become any woman, but also because of her size and flexibility beyond human women. In the words of Lancelot, what you want is Avatar. Lancelot, are you the new mutant recruited by the professor? Beast Hank was jealous when he saw the way Raven looked at Lancelot. He walked to Raven's side, looked at Lancelot with hostility, and asked again. Unfortunately, your professor abandoned me. Lancelot glanced at Hank, his face slightly indifferent, and his tone was still full of resentment towards Professor X and Magneto for abandoning him. I'm very curious about the X-Men established by Charles, but today, you guys have disappointed me. Lancelot turned his head to look at the young mutants, and said with some disappointment. He looked at Mutant, Mystique Raven, Beast Hank, Siren Sean Cassidy, Shockwave Alex, Dragonfly Salvador, and Darwin in the room one by one. The mutant abilities of these people are undoubtedly very powerful, but their mutant level has only reached the level of mutant. Epsilon, Delta, Gamma, Beta, Alpha, Omega are the most orthodox ability levels for mutant. But Lancelot does not plan to follow this set of ability levels, but divides them into level 1 mutant, level 2 mutant, level 3 mutant, level 4 mutant, level 5 mutant and the strongest level 6 mutant. Most of the abilities of the mutants in front of them have reached level 3 to 4, but the way they use their abilities is still at level 1. And Wolverine Logan, Sabertooth Victor, has reached the pinnacle of level 4 and is about to enter the ranks of level 5 mutant. Professor X, Magneto, Black Emperor Shao, White Queen Emma and others have reached the 5th level of mutant, which can be regarded as the first echelon of mutant. And Lancelot's mutant ability, theoretically, can only be regarded as a first-level mutant, but who let him have a system plug-in? The ability of Pupil Geass is enough to make Lancelot rank among the first echelon of 5-level mutants. My fellow mutants, I'm very disappointed in you. In the hall where the X-Men were, Lancelot looked at these mutants with a pair of eyes and said disappointedly. Disappointed. Raven frowned when he saw the undisguised disappointment in Lancelot's eyes. The other mutants, Alex, Sean Cassidy, Hank, and Darwin glared at Lancelot even more. As young people, they think that they are very outstanding, even different, and they have even gotten used to the strange eyes of humans looking at monsters in the past month. But at this moment, seeing Lancelot, who is also a mutant, look so contemptuously at him, it makes them feel unacceptable. If it wasn't for Sabertooth Victor, who stood behind Lancelot like an iron tower and exuded a bloody and fierce beast aura, they would have retorted at Lancelot long ago. Aren't you convinced? What do you think is a mutant? A strange species that appeared among humans. A freak. Lancelot glanced at a few people and couldn't help but sneered. Compared with what happened to Lancelot 3 years after becoming a mutant, these mutants were still flowers in the greenhouse, and they didn't even realize how different mutants were from humans. What is mutant? Mystique Raven fell into deep thought. Although she has been with Professor X and graduated from Oxford University, she is considered a top student, but she has never thought about this question. Professor X has been teaching her to hide herself so that she can integrate into human society. Professor X never taught her what a mutant is. The one with the ability that is different from ordinary people is the mutant. Although Alex Shockwave was taciturn, he was good at thinking. He looked at the young Asian American who didn't look particularly tall in front of him, and said his answer. An ability that is different from ordinary people can only be called a super ability, but not a mutant. Lancelot looked at all the mutants here again in disappointment, and directly refuted Alex's statement. Mutant, the reason why it is called mutant, is derived from the mutant gene awakening in human genes. From ancient times to the present, mutant genes have been buried in the depths of human genes. As time goes by, the mutant genes in human body gradually awakening, and mutant was born. Lancelot spoke directly to Mutant's answer. Strictly speaking, everyone has a mutant gene in their body, but most people will not be able to awaken this gene in their entire lives, and a few lucky ones, by chance, awakening the mutant gene in their body, so as to master the mutant gene in the body of ordinary people or ability. This is the spontaneous mutation and evolution of human beings, which cannot be stopped. Lancelot's voice was full of emotion, and his passionate voice echoed in the room, making several young mutants feel their blood boil. Mutation and evolution. Raven's eyes showed a hint of understanding. No wonder Professor X often talked about mutation and evolution. It turned out that the mutant's ability was mutated through a recessive mutant gene among humans. That's right, mutation and evolution. Lancelot walked in front of Raven, looking at Raven's graceful blue body, with a smile on his face. There is a difference between mediocrity and genius among human beings. Geniuses are like Einstein and Howard Stark. They are smart and intelligent, and there is no one in a million. The mediocrity is blind and ignorant, muddling along. And we, the evolutionary geniuses among human beings, awakened mutants with mutated genes. We are the pioneers and revolutionaries of human evolution. It is the natural selection of evolution, one in a million. The existence of mutant demonstrates one of the genetic evolution paths in the future evolution path of human beings. We are using life and our own existence to explore and open up the evolutionary path for human beings. Lancelot's words became passionate. Although he was not an orator, his understanding of mutant gave him a high-level view, and his speech was even more enlightening. Are we the evolutionary pioneers of mankind? Explorers on the path of evolution? We are born noble. Are we evolutionary geniuses different from humans? Mutation and evolution. In the room, because of Lancelot's passionate speech, Alex, Sean Cassidy, Hank, and Darwin, who were originally hostile to Lancelot, also gave up their inner prejudices at this moment, and began to be mobilized by Lancelot. And Salvador, who has always been engaged in such a humble job as a dancer, is even more excited at this moment, looking at Lancelot with fiery eyes. For the first time, she was regarded as a genius, a great pioneer, and explorer, not a human freak, a lowly dancer. And Raven looked at Lancelot adoringly like a little girl. Whether it is Raven, Alex, Darwin or others, they all carefully hide their mutant ability, fearing that they will be discovered by their human family and friends, and then be regarded as freaks, monsters and the like. And now, after hearing Lancelot's words, they were all proud of their status as mutants. Mutants are the pioneers and revolutionaries of human evolution. They are using their own lives, existence, and even their abilities to open up a broad road for the evolution of the human race and pioneer human evolution. My mutant compatriots, the identity of mutant represents a kind of glory. We have embarked on the path of evolution. We are the leaders of the path of human evolution, and we are geniuses above billions of mediocre human beings. We are unique, we carry evolution and glory. Remember, my fellow mutants, are we monsters? Or freak? No, 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 on the contrary, we are geniuses beyond human beings, the future of human evolution. We are supposed to be born noble and admired by all people. Variation in glory. Quote, Lancelot delivered a heartfelt, passionate speech. Raven and others were all shocked by Lancelot's variant glory theory, followed by a sense of heartfelt recognition. So, Raven, do you still think your mutant ability is a burden? Lancelot walked up to Raven, gently stroked Raven's face, and asked with a smile on his face. Mutation and glory. Raven looked at Lancelot excitedly, and couldn't help but read out Lancelot's words. Chapter 11. You are obviously so outstanding, you are at the forefront of the evolutionary path, and you have become the great pioneers and explorers of the evolutionary path. But he doesn't think about making progress, he is willing to be with the mediocre human beings around him, and even hides his mutant ability, which is really short-sighted and not thinking about making progress. Lancelot looked at the excited crowd, a look of disappointment appeared in his eyes, and he reprimanded him bluntly. Your mutant ability is the key to unlock the evolutionary path. God has personally delivered the key to you. If you can shapeshifting, use it, experience it, and understand it. Lancelot glanced at Raven, and then walked in front of Darwin. Extreme environments are where you should be, not a black cab driver, you deserve a bigger future. You should conquer extreme environments, constantly adapt to extreme environments, and explore how humans can survive and evolve in extreme environments. You should be a guiding light in the field of human evolution, a great explorer, and a practitioner. Lancelot clenched his fist with his right hand and slammed it on Darwin's body. After Darwin was attacked, his body skin automatically evolved into a leather material. Since you can make screaming sound waves, you should study it and develop it in depth. Those human cubs know how to use sonar and sound waves, but you are complacent after receiving a gift from heaven. It is really reckless. Lancelot walking in front of Sean Cassidy, the sea monster, he scolded unceremoniously. If you can release the shock wave, then try to control it and analyze it in depth. If you can fly, then you can understand your own body structure and see which organs are used for flight. If you have a super high IQ, use it. Lancelot glanced at Shockwave Alex, Dragonfly Salvador and Beast Hank in turn, then shook his head slightly, and continued. My fellow mutants, you are supposed to be a group of great pioneers and explorers, but look now, what have you done with your abilities? Broken glass, stepping yourself into a fish tank, hiding yourself, cut off the statue. You are bringing dust to the entire mutant race. Remember, mutations represent evolution, but also a kind of glory. Release them, understand them, and explore them. You will become the guiding lights of mankind, and history will remember your achievements. The theory of mutant glory is the truest thought in Lancelot's heart. Now that he has obtained the mutant ability that human beings dream of, then continue to go on, explore, study in depth, and overcome obstacles on the unprecedented evolutionary path until reaching the end of the evolutionary path. Among these mutants, Lancelot is most optimistic about Raven and Darwin. The mutant ability of these two people is completely underestimated. The first is Mystique Raven. Its variant ability is shapeshifting. This kind of shapeshifting is shapeshifting from the shape, appearance, and genetics. Even Raven's shapeshifting can be reproduced together with clothes. If it is fully developed, even other mutants' ability can be reproduced. The Sentinel in Reversal of the Future has the ability to reproduce other mutants at will because of the addition of Mystique's genes. Even in the future, Raven will be able to shapeshift into other body alienation mutants, and can stretch out bone claws when she becomes Wolverine. This shows that her body already has the mutant ability of Wolverine Logan, but Raven has not developed it before. Unable to use out. Although it is impossible to replicate Professor X's telepathy, Magneto's magnetic field control, Black Emperor Shao's energy absorption and other variant abilities, as long as it is a mutant with an alienated body, Raven can perfectly shapeshift it. In addition to Raven's variant ability, the most underestimated here is Darwin's adaptive evolution. He can constantly adapt to evolution according to the environment, allowing the body to evolve adaptive organs on its own. In theory, as long as he is given time, he can adapt even to the space environment. However, it is a pity that before he could perfectly control the mutant ability, he was directly strangled in the cradle by the Black Emperor Shao, and became the target of the blood sacrifice of the first generation of X-Men. For Lancelot, Darwin is not suitable for synthesis as a warrior. He should be in various extreme environments, use his ability to adapt to them, and then evolve specific organs, and then use scientific means to perfect these specific organs. A replica of it is transplanted into other people's bodies. Even not just adapting to the environment, Darwin can also adapt to various human diseases, and then produce various antibodies in the body. At that time, Darwin will be the founder and pioneer of medical miracles. The ability adapted to evolution can be said to be a level 5 mutant ability. As long as he can grow up, Darwin will be a proper level 5 mutant, and it will be difficult to die by then. For Lancelot, the mutant variant ability, as long as it is well developed, can become a powerful mutant. Only garbage mutant, no garbage mutant ability. Even mutant abilities like Toad People and Quill People can still become strong as long as they are well developed. The reason why Toad People and Quill People behave rubbish is that they have insufficient development of their own mutant abilities. And even a mutant ability like Magneto, because of the development of Magneto, was dubbed the Iron King, forcibly developing an Omega ability to a level that can only reach the peak level of a level 5 mutant. It's just too much. Obviously possessing the power to easily control the Earth's magnetic field, but it is used to control metals. Isn't it good to control the magnetic force? Isn't the super electromagnetic gun fragrant? Magneto still suffers from being uneducated. Lancelot couldn't help complaining secretly. Can we really be respected by people? In the room, the young first-generation X-Men looked at each other, and after hearing Lancelot's passionate speech, they couldn't help their blood boiling. Especially when Lancelot described the future of mutant for them, they were even more excited. What an honor it is to lead mankind on the path of evolution and become a great explorer and pioneer by using its own mutant ability. The era of evolutionary takeoff is coming. We mutants are the first group of explorers to travel in the sea of evolution. Just like Columbus once discovered the New World, the road of evolution also needs us to discover and explore. Lancelot said with a calm voice and a firm tone. Come, follow me, and you will be honored and respected. Lancelot stretched out his hands, looking at the group of mutants with fiery eyes. This time Lancelot did not use the power of Geas. For this group of younger generation colleagues who are still in a period of confusion and can't find a future direction at all, Lancelot only needs to be their guide, so that they can follow him voluntarily. Speaking of which, Lancelot would also like to thank Professor X. The Professor at the moment is not the wise old man in the future. The current Professor X is young and energetic, and he is even more indifferent to what happened to Mutant. The reason for confronting He Huangshao is just to prevent this beautiful world from ending so early. As for setting future goals for the mutants, helping them get through the period of confusion and difficulties, Professor X has never thought about it. It is also because of this that Lancelot just came here to publish a mutant glory theory, which touched the hearts of these young X-Men, and even aroused their approval and favor for Lancelot. As for such remarks, Lancelot could have come up with a lot of them in his previous life. They were nothing more than genre, but were there not many people genre in the previous life? Lancelot, I'm honored to meet you. After Lancelot sent out the invitation, Raven walked out without hesitation, and looked at Lancelot with fanaticism. Then, with graceful steps, he walked to Lancelot's side, and gently grabbed Lancelot's right hand. Hey, Raven, you can't do this, aren't we a team? Beast Hank, who had an ambiguous attitude towards Raven, was the first to dissuade him. Yeah, Raven, aren't we a team? Siren Sean Cassidy also agreed. Although he also agreed with Lancelot's words in his heart, he didn't want to follow Lancelot because he didn't know what kind of variant ability Lancelot has. Compared with Lancelot who knows nothing, he still has telepathy, and Professor X and Magneto who can control metal, which is stronger and more knowledgeable. Yeah, Raven, you can't just leave like this. Even Shockwave's taciturn Alex admonished him. Everyone, we are indeed a team, but if you look at the eyes of the people around you, what do you see? Disgust, fear, discrimination. Raven frowned slightly, and subconsciously clenched Lancelot's right hand. Shen Sheng said. Raven's words silenced Beast Hank and the others. Although they lived here for a month, they were like monkeys in a zoo, often being teased, ridiculed, and even discriminated against by the people in the base. For a month, what they faced was the disgust, fear and deep malice of human beings, so they used the party to numb themselves and let themselves forget the strange eyes of the people around them. At this moment, their scars were ruthlessly uncovered by Raven, making them unable to stop Raven's decision anymore. Mr. Lancelot, I think you are right. I am not suitable for fighting. As you said, extreme environments are the most suitable place for me. Darwin, who had not spoken all this time, also stepped out at this moment and stood by Lancelot, to the left. Hank. Raven looked towards Beast Hank expectantly and encouragingly, but Hank just shook his head slightly after hesitating for a moment. The current Hank still thinks that he is a human being, but a human being with bigger feet. Hank rejects the identity of mutant from the bottom of his heart. Raven, this is a variant inhibitor I developed using your cell gene. Although Beast Hank did not agree to Raven's invitation, he still walked up to Raven and handed a needle to Raven. The potion exudes blue light. Thank you, Hank, but I don't think I need it anymore. Raven gave Beast Hank a grateful look, shook his head slightly and said. Mutation suppression potion. Lancelot looked at the potion in Raven's hand with an interested smile on his face. Hank, if possible, I would like to get all the research data of this potion. Lancelot glanced at Beast Hank, and then said. Research data. Beast Hank was stunned for a moment, and then looked at Raven. He felt that this was researched using Raven's cells, and Raven's opinion should be sought. Under Raven's nod, Beast Hank brought Lancelot and others to his laboratory, and then handed over all the information about the variant inhibitor to Lancelot. Mr. Lancelot, is this potion important to you? Raven couldn't help but ask after seeing the smile on Lancelot's face. No, this potion has no effect on me. But it is very useful to those mutants whose bodies are alienated. Lancelot handed the potion and research materials to Victor Sabertooth, meaning said deeply. Let's go, it's time for us to leave here. Lancelot took a deep look at Beast Hank, and then left with Raven and others. Beast Hank just thinks that he has developed a variant inhibitor that can suppress his variant ability. But Lancelot, who is familiar with the plot, knows that the one developed by Beast is not a mutant inhibitor at all. Its correct name should be called mutant growth hormone. It is because of this mutant growth hormone that Beast Hank has been dissimulated from the original 2 feet to the whole body, becoming Beast Hank, and at the same time gained the strength and speed of a beast. As Lancelot said, this potion has no effect on himself, or even on Raven, but it is enough for an alienated mutant like Sabertooth Victor to directly metamorphosis into a 5th-level mutant. X-Men base. At the previous CIA high-level meeting, Counselor Francis overcame all opinions and agreed to Agent Mora's request to use Mutant to deal with Mutant. Therefore, he also became the top person in charge of the Mutant base as a matter of course. However, he, the top person in charge, is not worthy of his name at this moment. Because, regarding how to recruit Mutant, Professor Charles Xavier didn't allow himself to intervene at all. What's even more hateful is that this Charles has a mutant ability to manipulate the brain, and he can't get rid of his mind control at all. Every time he had a disagreement with him, he would use that terrifying mutant ability to change his mind and make himself follow his. The terrifying ability, the terrifying mutant, are they really the future of mankind? Genetic mutation. What kind of genetic mutation will produce such an ability? Counselor Francis, who was sitting in the office, sighed helplessly, and then said worriedly. This member Francis is the only person in the entire CIA who doesn't have much prejudice against Mutant, but after witnessing Mutant's terrifying power again and again, he still inevitably falls into fear. Even in the past few days, Counselor Francis has been having nightmares every night. In his dream, he is surrounded by all kinds of grotesque and ugly mutants, and he is a human animal locked in a zoo. Even after I learned about Mutant, I am so afraid of it. Those high-level council members who are already afraid of Mutant are probably even more uneasy. Counselor Francis smiled wryly. Even he was so afraid of Mutant's power, the high-ranking members of the council were probably even more afraid and fearful of Mutant's attitude. Boom. Just when Counselor Francis was full of confusion and began to feel fear of Mutant, the door of Francis's office was kicked open. Then Francis saw in astonishment that a strong man like an iron tower walked into the office. Who are you? How did you get in? Francis looked at the burly man in front of him in astonishment. After entering the room, the burly man stood aside, and a handsome young Asian man walked in, which made Francis frown, wrinkle. Although he was not a racist, he was still a little surprised to see that this young Asian man was the head of all the people who came in. Raven, Darwin. Just as Francis was about to continue asking, he saw two familiar faces, Raven and Darwin from the X-Men, which made Francis even more puzzled. Those who came in were Lancelot, Victor Sabertooth, Mystique Raven and Darwin. Cub, look straight at me. At this moment, Lancelot looked at Counselor Francis indifferently, and said with a cold tone and aloofness. Contrary to the amiable expression when talking with Mutant before, Lancelot at this moment is like a king, with a pair of eyes exuding full majesty. Lancelot, Raven and Darwin also saw Lancelot in such a posture for the first time, and were a little dazed for a while. Counselor Francis subconsciously turned his head to look at Lancelot again, and then Francis saw a pair of ruby-like eyes. In this pair of exquisite eyes, there is also a fiery red bird flying high. Follow my orders. Lancelot giossed directly at Francis. Of order. The light in Francis's eyes turned into frenzy in an instant, and he saluted Lancelot respectfully. Find out all the information that records Mutant. Lancelot looked down at the respectful Francis and ordered. A red light flashed across Francis's eyes, and he quickly took out a document from the safe. My lord, what is this? Sabertooth Victor looked down at the document in Lancelot's hand, and couldn't help asking curiously. Our comrades. Lancelot glanced at the document in his hand, with a smile on his face, and said meaningfully. This time I came to the X-Men base, on the one hand to see these young X-Men, and on the other hand, to get a document in the base. Mutant Information File. This document is all the mutant information detected by Professor X using the brainwave strengthening device. Every time a mutant is detected, Professor X will record it, and it is detailed, even its variant ability is recorded. Among them is Lancelot's name, and the variant ability. Lancelot flipped through this document, seeing the introduction of the mutant ability behind his name, and couldn't help but feel deeply moved. Name, Lancelot, Asian, both parents died, wandering in Lower Manhattan, New York for 3 years, mutant ability, red eyes, has a pair of beautiful ruby eyes, no other effects, pass. Single quote. Looking at the big X behind his name, Lancelot was a little dazed for a moment. If he hadn't traveled through time and awakened the god-level pupil technique lottery system, this record would probably have included everything about him. Turning over the page that recorded himself, Lancelot's eyes suddenly lit up, and at the same time Sabertooth Victor's tiger body shook. Name: James Logan, Canadian, unknown date of birth, irritable personality, wolf-like, mutant ability, lone wolf, able to stretch out bone claws from his body, tried to recruit, failed. Single quote. Logan. Sabertooth Victor looked at a photo on the file, and his emotions suddenly became agitated. His hands couldn't help stretching out sharp claws, his gaze became extremely complicated, and his voice became murderous, steaming. Victor. Lancelot turned to glance at Sabertooth Victor, and after hearing Lancelot's words, Victor calmed down for a moment. My lord, I'm really sorry. After seeing my mutant brother, I got a little emotional. Sabertooth Victor smiled wryly and bowed to apologize, and the sharp claws that had been stretched out slowly disappeared. Lancelot just glanced at Victor, and then looked down at the document in his hand again. Name: Matthew Harlan, mutant ability, Toad, mutant effect, deformed head, able to release a long tongue, low self-esteem, expelled by his family as a freak after awakening, full of hatred for humans. Single quote. Looking at the picture of mutant above, Lancelot can tell at a glance that he is a toad who appeared in reversal of the future. His deformed and huge head and toad-like eyes make him incompatible with normal people, and he is even attracted by himself, abandoned by his family. Charles has not yet grown into the future Professor X. Looking at pass behind the Toad Man, he shook his head slightly. This Toad Man was abandoned by Professor X because of his deformed appearance. Lancelot flipped through several documents in a row, and they were all deformed mutants. Most of these mutants had a very bad life. However, Lancelot also spotted some familiar faces, members of the mutant squad formed by the future Wilhelm Stryker. Zero Agent David North, Phantom John, Bradley who can control electronic devices with his mind, future Wolverine's lover Silver Fox Carla, Gambit Remy LeBeau. It is a pity that these people are all scattered in various countries, too far away from the X-Men base, so Professor X and Magneto just recorded it and did not go to recruit it. This gave Lancelot a chance. Let's go, we've got what we need. Lancelot glanced down at the documents in his hand, and then led Sabertooth Victor, Raven and Darwin out of X-Base. Lancelot's mutant evolution home base. The two vehicles drove through the entrance of the base and entered the underground base, which covers an area of huge amounts of ground. Then on a huge amounts of platform, the vehicle stopped, and Lancelot walked down with Raven and Darwin. Is this the house of mutant evolution you were talking about? Lancelot. It's really too big. Raven looked at the huge amounts of base in front of him, the shock on his face was beyond words. The base in front of him is more than 100 times larger than the X-base that Raven and the others were in before, and the complete internal facilities and personnel make Raven amazed. The whole base, no matter in terms of facilities, personnel, logistics, etc., is more complete than the previous X-base, even luxurious. Raven and Darwin couldn't help being amazed by the security personnel, scientific researchers, logistics support personnel, etc., and looked at each other in blank dismay. Welcome Miss Raven and Mr. Darwin. The glory of mutant will bloom because of you. While Raven and Darwin were constantly looking at the House of Evolution, a CIA agent came over and looked at them with admiration and respect. He held two special medals in his hands. The future of mankind will be dominated by you. You are great pioneers and explorers. Please allow me to pay you the highest respect. Variation and glory. The agent was so excited that he handed the medal to Raven and Darwin at the same time. Raven lowered his head and glanced at the medal in his hand. It was a beautifully shaped medal. On the front of the medal was a fiery red flying bird. On the back of the medal was a crystal clear blood red eye. Words. What is this? Raven looked at the exquisite medal in his hand in surprise, turned to Lancelot and asked. This is the Medal of Evolution, which means evolution and glory. Lancelot briefly explained, and then took Raven and Darwin to the core research area of the base. This is the treatment mutants should have. Raven followed behind Lancelot, with excitement and joy still lingering in his eyes. Along the way, everyone's eyes are full of respect, there is no disgust, no fear, no discrimination, and some only respect. For the first time, Raven felt that a world without discrimination and disgust was so close to him. My king. When Raven was a little lost, Lancelot had already arrived at the core area of the base. A cutting-edge genetic laboratory dedicated to research on how to better develop mutant. At this moment, in the laboratory, after seeing Lancelot, all the scientists put down their work and bowed. Dr. Leonard, how is Victor's self-healing factor research going? Lancelot nodded slightly, then looked at Dr. Leonard, the head of the genetic laboratory, and asked. My lord, we have isolated the self-healing factor in Mr. Victor's cells, and through experimental calculations, this self-healing factor is a very miraculous gene repair factor, which can repair any damage to the body. Even according to our calculations, even if only the head of Mr. Victor remains, as long as the self-healing factor is sufficient, Mr. Victor can even grow a body again. Dr. Leonard was extremely excited at the moment, and said eloquently. After Lancelot conquered Sabertooth, he asked Sabertooth to provide a blood sample for Dr. Leonard's laboratory research. Lancelot hoped that this laboratory could assist in the development of Sabertooth's variant ability based on Sabertooth's sample gene. Now, though, Lancelot has a better way. Please take a look at this information. I want you to calculate whether this potion has an effect on mutants. Lancelot directly interrupted Leonard, who was talking endlessly, and then asked Sabertooth Victor to share the drug. The research data recording the variant mutant growth hormone was handed over to Dr. Leonard. 2 hours later, Dr. Leonard found Lancelot excitedly again, even more excited than before. My lord, the person who created this potion is definitely a genius. Dr. Leonard held a research document in his hand, and said in an excited and appreciative tone. Dr. Leonard had already thoroughly studied all the materials on the mutant growth hormone, and he was immediately astonished. According to his research, the mutant growth hormone was the purest gene catalyst without any side effects. It can catalyze special mutations in the body from the genetic level, allowing them to directly become complete mutants. The evolution of human beings does not happen overnight. The same is true for mutant mutations. It takes a long time to adapt and develop the awakening variant ability step by step. Finally, the variant ability changes from weak to strong, and finally tends to be stable. But this potion directly omits the process of slowly adapting and slowly developing, and advances the mutant ability to maturity in one step. However, this variant mutant growth hormone has a disadvantage, that is, it can only be applied to the variant gene of the body alienation type. Dr. Leonard concluded in conclusion. My king, I beg you to let me use this potion. Sabertooth Victor, who was following Lancelot, after hearing Dr. Leonard's introduction, knelt down in front of Lancelot with fiery eyes, pleading said. Although Sabertooth Victor has regained his sanity and wisdom, he pursues a strong personality in his bones, so he can't wait to experiment with the ability of the mutant growth hormone. As you wish, Victor. With a smile on Lancelot's face, he agreed directly to Sabertooth Victor's request. This potion was originally prepared by Lancelot for those mutants with alienated bodies. Even if Sabertooth Victor didn't beg, he would let Sabertooth Victor test the effect of this potion. Mr. Victor, please follow me. With Lancelot's nod, Dr. Leonard respectfully brought Sabertooth Victor into a specially made room. Afterwards, Dr. Leonard handed the mutant growth hormone in his hand to Sabertooth Victor, and after sticking the induction patches on Victor's sturdy body one by one, he quickly left the room. Mr. Victor, please always report your feelings after the injection. This will be very helpful to the mutants in the future. Dr. Leonard stood in a testing room, looking at the front of him with a dozen other scientists. Various instruments, and then said. In the special alloy room, Victor Sabertooth was sitting on the metal bed at the moment, watching Lancelot in front of the observation window with fanaticism and respect, and then respectfully waiting for Lancelot's order. Let's go, Victor. Looking at the observation window, Lancelot nodded to Sabertooth Victor. Laugh. Sabertooth Victor didn't have any hesitation, and directly pierced the needle in his hand into the artery of his right arm. After fully injecting the mutant growth hormone into the body, Sabertooth pulled out the needle directly, and the original needle hole was restored in an instant. Mr. Victor, how do you feel now? In front of the observation window, Dr. Leonard asked while turning on the video recorder. I feel my body is very relaxed, as if a heavy burden has been lifted. Sabertooth Victor felt his body silently, with a rare look of relief on his face, and Sabertooth's sharp claws gradually retracted go back. The originally strong body seemed to have shrunk, becoming like a normal person. Even his size had shrunk from a 2-meter giant to 1.8 meters. The thick hair on the face has also disappeared. I don't seem to be able to feel my mutant ability anymore. Victor Sabertooth looked at his body and said with surprise on his face. This was the first time that Victor felt that he had become like an ordinary person, without vigorous vitality, without a strong body, and even the muscles he once had no longer existed. This feeling made Sabertooth Victor very uncomfortable, and at the same time he had a deeper understanding of his mutant ability. Mutate ability, achieve yourself as a Sabertooth. And without the mutant ability, he is just a weak ordinary person. Lancelot stood in front of the observation window, quietly looking at Sabertooth Victor's appearance at the moment. Victor in this appearance is very similar to Sabertooth Victor in Wolverine 1, and he is completely different from the 2-meter giant before. Roar. 5 minutes later, the originally relaxed Sabertooth Victor suddenly let out a heart-piercing roar. His facial features were distorted and ferocious, and the veins on his forehead were bulging. It was obvious that he was suffering from great pain. Mr. Victor, report your information. Dr. Leonard looked at the various data displayed by the instrument in front of him with the same serious expression at this moment, and asked again. It's painful, as if the whole body is being torn apart inch by inch. Sabertooth Victor let out a painful roar, and then the whole body began to undergo changes visible to the naked eye. Kakaka. There were bursts of bone explosions. Sabertooth Victor's bones began to break inch by inch, and then began to constantly reorganize from the cellular level. Victor's original body size of 1.8 meters gradually expanded like an inflated ball. The muscles that had disappeared before covered his body again at this moment, and became even more muscular and handsome. Roar. Sabertooth Victor roared in pain again. His whole body stumbled in the room because of the pain, and the 2 fangs in his mouth also began to grow rapidly. At the same time, Victor's face began to become ferocious, and the human facial features began to disappear, replaced by a tiger-like beast-shaped face. Muscle tissue and bones are still constantly expanding. Victor's body size began to expand rapidly from 1.8 meters, and reached 2.5 meters in an instant, and then continued to grow constantly. 2 meters 5, 3 meters, 4 meters. Victor stopped growing when he reached a full 4 meters. At the same time, his limbs were extremely well proportioned and plump. His hands and feet had been replaced by feline limbs, and flesh pads and sharp edges grew on his limbs. Claw. Roar, roar. Sabertooth Victor suddenly landed on all fours and roared to the sky. The terrifying roar of the tiger formed sound waves layered on top of each other in the metal room, like a forest of roaring tigers, which was shocking. At the same time, brown hair began to grow rapidly on Victor's body. These hairs covered his whole body, and a tail grew out of his back. The tail was like a whip, swaying slightly, and a sound erupted in the air. The sound exploded. Oh my God, this is simply a miracle. This is the atavistic evolution of human beings. This is another milestone feat in human evolution. At this moment, the scientists in the core laboratory looked at Sabertooth Vic, who had regained his composure. Many couldn't help but gasped, and then said in amazement again and again. Victor, how are you feeling? Lancelot also had a smile on his face, looking at Sabertooth Victor through the observation window. In the room at this moment, there is no trace of human beings, but instead, there is a strong and handsome prehistoric giant beast. Sabertooth. The body is 4 meters long, covered with brown hair, with a tiger's head and powerful limbs. The saber teeth on the tiger's mouth are gleaming, and the body is well proportioned. Its huge body was crawling on the ground at this moment, and a pothole was suddenly sunken in the metal ground under its feet. A pair of piercing golden animal pupils were exuding excitement at the moment. My lord, I feel great. Victor Sabertooth crawled on his knees, knelt on both front legs, saluted in Lancelot's direction, and then said excitedly. He now felt enormous strength, as well as super agility and reflexes, and the heaviness in his body had disappeared. Instead, it was natural, and a kind of bestial perception. At this moment, he seemed to be a Sabertooth by nature, exuding a fierce and unrestrained beast aura. Base. Victor raised his front paws, and 5 sharp claws popped out from the pads, and then lightly scratched on the alloy wall. Like cutting tofu, the sharp claws pierced directly into the alloy, and then drew 5 deep scratches on the alloy wall. Moreover, not only his mutant ability has evolved to a full body form, Sabertooth Victor found that he can now easily control the changes in his body. Roar! Sabertooth Victor let out another roar, and then his huge body began to shrink again, turning back into the 2-meter-strong man again. Sure enough, the mutant growth hormone has an unimaginable effect on the alienated mutant. Looking out the window, Lancelot looked at the changes in Sabertooth Victor, with a look of satisfaction on his face. The body alienation type, especially the animal alienation type mutant, in Lancelot's view, is not much different from One Piece's animal type devil fruit. The difference is that the growth process of the mutant gene will be very long, but now with the mutant growth hormone, Lancelot can easily create a mutant army. This state is called mutant awakening. Lancelot glanced at Sabertooth Victor, and then named Sabertooth's form Mutant Awakening. Go, find them, find my mutant comrades. In the House of Mutant Evolution, Lancelot sat on a high platform with his right hand supporting his chin, looking down at the elite agents below, and then gave an order. I obey, my king. Under the high platform, the elite agent headed by Paul Yulton touched his chest with his right hand, bent down to salute, and shouted my king. Afterwards, these people left the base like a tide with a document in hand. My king Lancelot. On the high platform, a blonde girl with exquisite facial features walked up to Lancelot with longing eyes, then threw herself into her arms and said with a light smile. Raven, my sweetheart. Lancelot looked at the blonde girl in front of him with admiration and facial features that fit his aesthetics very well, and couldn't help but kissed and said. 3 days have passed since Lancelot returned to the House of Mutant Evolution. During these 3 days, Lancelot has been testing various data of Sabertooth Victor. And with the test, Lancelot also had an accurate judgment on Sabertooth Victor's mutant power at this moment. Level 5 mutant. Moreover, because of the self-healing factor in Victor's body and the animal perception, Sabertooth Victor is a leader even among the 5-level mutants. Even in the face of Magneto, Black Emperor Shao also has the power to fight. Definitely, Black Emperor Shao is likely to have started to absorb nuclear energy now. His body should store a lot of nuclear energy, and Sabertooth Victor is not enough to deal with him simply. After confirming that Sabertooth has become a 5th-level mutant, Lancelot sent Sabertooth out to find his mutant brother Wolverine Logan. My lord, you like it like this, or like this? When Lancelot was meditating, Raven had already sat on Lancelot's body, and blue scales appeared on his whole body, and then the original blonde hair and blue eyes turned into AA beauty with black hair and black eyes. Raven, you should be very clear, as long as it is beautiful, I like it. Shaking his head, Lancelot looked at Mystique Raven in front of him and said with a light smile. Raven looked at Lancelot obsessively. She had fallen in love with Lancelot deeply. When she was the loneliest and most inferior, it was Lancelot who rescued her and gave her self-esteem and human respect and respect that she had never experienced before. Love. Therefore, during these 3 days, Raven almost changed his tricks to please Lancelot, and Lancelot readily agreed. Owning Mystique Raven is equivalent to owning all the beauties in the world. What makes Lancelot especially satisfied is that Mystique Raven's body flexibility and shape-shifting ability to change her body size at will make Lancelot linger on. It wasn't until this time that Lancelot finally understood the meaning of the king not coming early. While Lancelot and Mystique Raven were happily playing poker, all agents in the entire CIA base acted under Lancelot's order. The huge intelligence system allowed these CIA agents to find the mutant on the mutant list without wasting much time. California, West Coast, Oakland. Bar. A black man dressed as a Western cowboy was sitting on the bar counter quietly drinking rum, looking at the laughing men and women in the bar. The man's eyes were full of envy. John, did you accidentally appear in the woman's bathhouse again today? When the Western cowboy was stunned, a strong white man came over and said with a mocking and contemptuous expression. John just glanced at the strong white man indifferently, and then gently lowered the Western cowboy hat on his head with his right hand, covering his eyes. Wow, look, this pervert who often appears in women's bathhouses, the freak actually ignored you, Mr. Jonathan. The strong white man Jonathan exaggeratedly yelled, attracting everyone in the bar. After paying attention, Jonathan immediately cursed at John with a fierce look in his eyes. Hey, freak, my girlfriend gave you a very nice name, Ghost John, how about it? Jonathan looked at the silent John, and mocked more wantonly. And the people around all looked at the black John with weird eyes, and some even agreed with Jonathan's ridicule and abuse constantly. Jonathan, you are looking for death. John, who had originally planned to ignore Jonathan, finally raised his head amidst Jonathan's constantly swearing. His eyes were full of cold killing intent. Boom. In response to John, it was Jonathan's powerful punch, and the heavy fist hit John's head, making John dizzy all of a sudden. Fack. John couldn't hold it any longer, cursed angrily, and then his whole body disappeared from the seat. Boom. Behind Jonathan, John appeared like a ghost, and then he kicked Jonathan's ass, and then John's figure joined together, constantly flickering around Jonathan. Boom. When John punched Jonathan on the head again, Jonathan was finally overwhelmed, fell to the ground, and passed out directly. And before passing out, John heard Jonathan's voice full of horror and resentment. Monster, freak, ghost John. Dude, I prefer to use the word phantom than Phantom John. From now on, please call me Phantom John. John glanced down at the fainted Jonathan, and then he was shocked by the horror of everyone and looked at a monster. In his eyes, he teleported out of the bar. Phantom John, mutant, born in Auckland, variant ability, teleportation, 7 years ago because of just awakening, ability was not stable, so it would often teleport uncontrollably into women's bathhouses or bathrooms, because of its variant ability, and be feared by the people of this city. Just as Phantom John walked out of the bar, a man in a black suit walked up to Phantom John and said abruptly, "Who are you?" Phantom John looked at the man in the suit in front of him, his face darkened, and he asked vigilantly, "CIA Agent Jerry, it's an honor to meet you, Mr. John." Agent Jerry looked at the Phantom John with a smile on his face at the moment, his eyes full of respect. This was the first time that Phantom John saw such a look, not disgust, not ridicule, not a look of looking at freaks, but a kind of respect from the heart. "Agent Jerry, what do you want?" Phantom John's face softened, he looked at Agent Jerry, and asked with some doubts. "Respected human pioneer, great evolutionary explorer. Genius ability among humans." Agent Jerry bowed slightly to Phantom John respectfully, but what he said surprised Phantom. "Dear Mr. John, King Lancelot welcomes you." Agent Jerry said respectfully again. This. Phantom John just stared blankly at Agent Jerry. He looked at the extremely respectful CIA agent in front of him, and his mind went blank for a moment. "Lancelot, King," Phantom John muttered in surprise, and then followed Jerry Agent into a car in a daze. And things like Phantom John are happening all over the world. London, England, Mutant Bradley looked at the respectful female agent in front of him at the moment. He was flattered by the female agent's invitation and readily agreed. In Europe, a mercenary base, a team of CIA agents quickly broke into this base, and then took control of everyone here. Under the astonished eyes of all the mercenaries, this group of CIA agents took away the sharpshooter who had always had a low sense of existence among them, the Korean mercenary, David North, number 0. In a tropical rainforest, a person with a head resembling toad is using his long tongue to hunt mosquitoes, rats and ants in the tropical rainforest, and several CIA agents went deep into it and took him away. In Las Vegas, in a casino, a man dressed as a gentleman was looking at the CIA agent in front of him vigilantly. His right hand had already quietly grabbed his short stick, but when he saw the CIA agent being so respectful, this man did not act rashly. Over time, more and more mutants were found. Humferson, report the situation of Base X. On the roof of the CIA headquarters building, a helicopter landed slowly, and then Lancelot walked out with Raven. On the roof of the building, Senator Humferson, the Supreme Commander of the CIA, had long been waiting. When he saw Lancelot, he immediately touched his chest with his right hand in a respectful salute. "My lord, Professor X Charles Xavier and Magneto Eric Lencher have just returned to Base X," Humferson said as he led Lancelot to his office. "Did you just come back? It's slower than I thought." Lancelot frowned slightly as he watched the surveillance video of Base X that Humferson opened. A week ago, Professor X Charles and Magneto went to Europe to track down and stop the Hellfire Club's conspiracy. With Professor X's ability, as long as he wants, he can even directly obtain the information of the Hellfire Club through the brain wave strengthening device. But the young Professor X is far away, insisting on the so-called humanitarianism, directly abandoning the brain-wave strengthening device, and instead chasing the mutant of Hellfire Club all over the world with Magneto. Therefore, it was not until today, a week later, that Lancelot finally got the news that Professor X had returned to the base. Ridiculous humanitarianism. Lancelot couldn't help but sneered, dismissing Professor X's humanitarianism. Human beings have never insisted on any humanitarianism towards mutant. Instead, they have an attitude that they would rather kill the wrong than let it go. After the first battle of Mutant, the mutant exposed to the eyes of high-level human beings has completely become a street mouse, treated as a poor mouse by human beings, and dissected and studied. And the root of all this is because of the naivety of Professor X Charles Xavier, who not only cooperated with the high-level CIA, but at the end of the first battle, he did not directly erase the memories of the soldiers of the two superpowers, resulting in the existence of mutant being banned, feared by countries all over the world. Charles. Behind Lancelot, Raven looked at Professor X in the surveillance video with a complicated face, and couldn't help but whispered to himself. Raven, do you want to meet Charles? Lancelot casually took Raven into his arms and asked. Forget it, Charles doesn't understand your greatness. Raven glanced at Lancelot, then shook his head firmly, the complexion on his face returned to calm. Then Lancelot and Raven turned their attention to the surveillance video in front of them at the same time. Raven and Darwin left. Professor X Charles, who had just returned to Base X, was informed by Beast Hank before he had time to report the intelligence he had obtained to Francis. At this moment, Professor X is still a young and handsome youth, not paralyzed or bald, and now Professor X is still a young gentleman. After hearing that Raven left the base with a stranger, Professor X, who was still discussing the next thing with Magneto, suddenly changed his face. He couldn't help but press his right hand directly on his temple. Beast Hank, who was planning to continue reporting to Professor X, suddenly lost his eyesight. This is Professor X using the power of his telepathy to read Beast Hank's memory. Lancelot, Mutant Glory. As Professor X reads the memory, all the scenes that happened 3 days ago are presented in front of Professor X, as if Professor X was in the room at that time. He looked at Lancelot's high-spirited and impassioned speech, and was slightly absent-minded for a while. Variation in glory. Professor X couldn't help sighing, and couldn't help muttering. When Professor X saw Lancelot from his memory, he already knew that this Lancelot was the Asian mutant that he and Magneto were planning to recruit. Because Lancelot's variant ability is too common, Professor X at that time directly gave up the idea of wanting Lancelot to join X-Men. Magneto, I think we are in big trouble. Professor X put down his right hand, looked at Magneto Eric with complicated eyes, and at the same time transmitted all the pictures he saw to Magneto's brain. Lancelot, who is this? Magneto froze for a moment, then looked at Professor X with a look of surprise on his face. Magneto always felt that he had seen Lancelot somewhere, but couldn't remember for a while. At this moment, Magneto has not yet established the belief in the supremacy of mutants. For him, any mutants or nuclear war crises are not as important as his own revenge. Sure enough, you have already forgotten him. Professor X shook his head with a wry smile, and then directly used his telepathy ability to find out the memory of Magneto recruiting Lancelot before. So it was him, that Asian. With the help of Professor X, Magneto finally remembered the existence of Lancelot. Eric, I have a bad premonition. Maybe that Lancelot will become a more terrifying existence than the Black Emperor Shao. Professor X said earnestly at this moment, after seeing Lancelot, telepathy constantly asked he had a very bad premonition. That is, in time, maybe this Asian youth will become a more terrifying enemy than He Huang Shao. Professor. The conversation between Professor X and Magneto was in his mind, and Beast Hank just saw that the two were slightly absent-minded, which made Beast Hank couldn't help interrupting their state. Phew, Hank, let's put the matter of Raven aside for now. Professor X let out a breath, put aside his bad premonition, and then said to Hank with a serious face. Charles, did you just give up on Raven? Isn't she your family? Hank looked at Professor X in astonishment. After learning that Professor X and others had returned, he immediately found Professor X and informed him Raven and Darwin follow the news of Lancelot's departure. Hank's original intention was to let Professor X search through the brainwave strengthening machine and persuade Raven to return to the X base. But what Beast Hank didn't expect was that Professor X was only surprised at the beginning, and there was no other action. Beast Hank knew that Professor X had always regarded Raven as his younger sister, and now that his younger sister left with a stranger, Professor X was indifferent. I checked Lancelot's brain once, and he has an innate sense of identification with Mutant, so there is no danger for Raven to follow him. Professor X saw what Beast Hank was thinking, and said comfortingly. Moreover, compared to Raven, the upcoming nuclear war crisis is more important. Hank, humanity is at stake now, and nuclear war is imminent. The world needs us. Professor X's eyes became extremely serious, and he said in a solemn tone. Charles, you really let me down again. Mystique Raven, who had been watching Base X through the surveillance video, was disappointed once again in his eyes. Raven was disappointed. Once again, I was disappointed with the Professor X Charles Xavier who I grew up with. Lancelot just glanced at Raven, and did not comfort Raven. He knew very well, let alone Raven, even the future Xavier Talent Academy, Professor X Charles gave up for the so-called future of mankind. Professor X was never a qualified mutant leader. Lancelot stood on the top floor of the CIA building, looking at the world in front of him through the floor-to-ceiling windows. In 1962, many facilities had not yet appeared. There is no surveillance that can be seen everywhere in the streets, no internet, no mobile phones and computers. The technology of this era is still very backward. And it is this backward era that has become a safe haven for mutants. Those mutants with deformed and alienated bodies can hide around like mice, without worrying about being photographed by cameras and surveillance that can be seen everywhere. Even the Hellfire Club, which is ambitious, wants to destroy the world, and prepares to start a nuclear war, has never been discovered that they are mutants. The only senior government officials who have discovered their identities are completely controlled by Hellfire Club's Black Emperor Shao. Mutant, this word, in this era, is really too strange to the whole world. However, because of the cooperation between Professor X and the CIA, the high-level government of this country saw the existence of Mutant for the first time, and realized the power and threat of Mutant for the first time. My lord, there is a special call from the military. While Lancelot was staring at the world beneath his feet, Humfrison hurried over after answering a call, and said respectfully. The military is mobilizing military forces at this moment, preparing for war mobilization. Humfrison frowned and reported. War mobilization. Humans really don't have a long memory. Not long after World War II ended, they were ready to start a war again. Lancelot turned around with a smirk on his face, his eyes were deep, and his tone was indifferent. My King Lancelot, do we want to act? Hearing Humfrison's words, Raven looked at the surveillance video with some concern and asked. It's not time for us to act yet. Lancelot shook his head casually and said. Now is not the best time for Lancelot to appear. His stage has not been set up yet. Moreover, only after the first battle of mutants will the group of mutants realize what they are in the eyes of human beings. Therefore, Lancelot still needs to wait for a while. Mutant needs a war. It's not so much Mutant's first battle, but rather a war where Mutant fully recognizes itself and human beings. Lancelot said a little playfully. Familiar with the plot, he is definitely clear that although the X-Men stopped the Black Emperor Shao in the first battle, it started the war between humans and mutants. If Lancelot wants to ascend to the throne by relying on the first battle of the new Emperor, he needs to follow the development of the plot and wait for the moment of the final battle on the island. Lancelot and Raven stayed temporarily in the CIA headquarters building. In the next few days, the U.S. military continuously sent orders, and documents about the Soviet Union's war readiness appeared in front of Lancelot like snowflakes. Lancelot flipped through the confidential information on the table casually, knowing the movements of the two superpowers like the palm of his hand. At this moment, Lancelot held several special documents in his hand, and his eyes were full of amusement. These few documents are not special to this world. They are about the weapons and armaments orders signed by the military. And the signature of the order party is the Stark Industrial Building. The Stark Group. A document signed by Howard Stark himself. Lancelot looked meaningfully at the several documents in front of him, and tapped the table with his right hand. According to the information collected by Lancelot these days, although this is not a pure MCU universe, it is almost the same. Except for the addition of mutants like himself, everything else has not changed much. At the current time point, S.H.I.E.L.D. in Marvel does not exist yet, and still maintains a stinky and long name. In S.H.I.E.L.D., the Hydra headed by Dr. Zola are still carrying out the infiltration plan. It will take a long time to become a snake escape game. Even in this era, even Captain Marvel Carol Danvers has not yet been born, and even the Star-Lord who made his teeth itch with hatred in his previous life and was crazily complained by countless people has not yet appeared. This era belongs to the era of Mutant. Lancelot sighed again. Lancelot casually threw the files back on the table and began to concentrate on his own affairs. The whole world seems to have fallen into a strange calm. But in the calm, there is a torrent brewing constantly, which is about to tear the whole world apart. On the high seas, inside a nuclear submarine, Hai Wang Xiao of the Hellfire Club is holding a glass of red wine in his right hand at the moment, savoring the aroma of the red wine leisurely. And beside Hai Wang Xiao, White Queen Emma, Red Devil Asazuo, the torrent was waiting, and they all looked at Hai Wang Xiao with excited eyes. My mutant brother, our plan is about to succeed. Now that the two superpowers are hoarding nuclear weapons in Cuba, what we need to do now is to act as the fuse. Hai Wang Xiao stood gracefully on a map with a smile all over his face, he said excitedly. Hai Wang Xiao was extremely excited at the moment. Ever since awakening the mutant ability, he has been looking for his own kind, and even participated in World War II for this. But there were too few mutants at that time. He hid in Auschwitz for several years and only found one mutant, that is Magneto Erich Lenscher. After the end of World War II, Black Emperor Shao has been running around in various countries, looking for mutants alone. In more than 20 years, he only found White Queen Emma, Red Devil Asazo, and Riptide. It is simply too little. Moreover, Hai Wang Xiao is tired of searching constantly, the world is too big, and although he has the energy-absorbing and mutant ability to release energy, this is of no help in finding mutant. He also tried to let White Queen Emma use the power of telepathy to find mutant, but unfortunately, White Queen Emma's telepathy is very powerful, but it is impossible to use telepathy to find mutant directly like Professor X. It is also for this reason that Hai Wang Xiao formulated the crazy idea of using the radiation produced by nuclear explosions to forcibly transform the surviving humans in the world into mutants. For Hai Wang Xiao, human beings are nothing more than bugs, and mutant is the future of this world, the ruler of this world. Emma, go to Moscow to control General Velivchenko. After being excited, Black Emperor Shao looked at White Queen Emma and ordered. Shao, if I leave, you can't stop Charles Xavier's telepathy. White Queen Emma frowned slightly. She didn't like this crazy plan of Hai Wang Xiao, but the long-term loneliness made her put Hai Wang Xiao the others identified as their companions. She didn't want her companions to be hurt. Emma, my old Soviet friend built this for me. Hai Wang Xiao still kept a gentlemanly smile on his face, then opened a box and took out a metal helmet made of a special alloy. Emma, try to see if you can still sense my thoughts now. After putting on the helmet, Hai Wang Xiao couldn't wait to say to Emma. Can it really block telepathy? Emma looked at the metal helmet on Hai Wang Xiao's head in astonishment, and said in amazement. It was synthesized using an alien metal discovered in a small African country, and after a long period of experiments. Hai Wang Xiao moved his arm slightly, explained briefly, and then looked at the Red Devil Asazuo. Let's go to Base X to teach our mutant brothers a lesson, it's a crucial moment. Did White Queen Emma go to Moscow alone? Inside the CIA headquarters, Lancelot put down the intelligence document in his hand, and then looked at the monitoring screen beside him. It seems that the plot has begun. A smile appeared on Lancelot's face, and then he looked at Raven, who was beside him with blonde hair and blue eyes. Raven, send this document to Base X. Lancelot casually handed the document to Raven. Okay, my Lord Lancelot. Raven nodded slightly, and left the office with the documents. And Raven, who just walked out of the office, became a CIA agent under the fluctuation of a blue scale. 2 hours later, Raven, who turned into a CIA agent, appeared at Base X, stood in front of Professor X and Magneto, and solemnly handed over the documents in his hand to Professor X. After Professor X and Magneto read White Queen Emma's information, they immediately decided to go to Moscow with Magneto and others to arrest White Queen Emma. Poor Charles. Looking at Professor X, Magneto, and Agent Mora who were leaving directly on the plane, Raven, who turned into a CIA agent, regained his true colors, and shook his head with some pity. Professor X and Magneto never imagined from the beginning to the end that everything about them was seen by Lancelot, and even the news the two of them got was what Lancelot wanted them to know. When Raven returned to the CIA headquarters, Lancelot had already been waiting for a long time. "My lord, Professor X has left." Raven walked behind Lancelot, turned into a beautiful woman with black hair and black eyes, gently squeezed Lancelot's shoulders, and said at the same time, "Yeah, I see." Lancelot nodded, his ruby eyes sparkling. Now that the plot is on track, Lancelot just needs to be patient. According to the plot of the first battle, Professor X and Magneto will capture White Queen Emma, and get the position of the Black Emperor Shao from Emma's head, and the Black Emperor Shao will also raid the X base and take away the Dragonfly Girl El Salvador. However, whether it is Professor X capturing White Queen Emma, or Black Emperor Shao raiding X base, it will take a long time. It was a rare period of silence, and Lancelot decided to take Raven outside to relax. "Let's go, Raven, let's go out for a stroll." Lancelot stood up from his seat, threw a bunch of car keys to Raven, and said with a chuckle, "The latest limited edition Future Series sports car produced by Stark Industry." He brought Raven to the underground garage of the CIA headquarters. Looking at the luxuriously equipped car in front of him, which looked like a modern sports car, Raven couldn't help but growl his mouth and exclaimed, "She has been with Professor X Charles since she was a child." Although Charles inherited a manor, he didn't have much money. Therefore, since childhood, although Raven is a mutant, just like ordinary people, he has never been exposed to the extravagant life of the upper class. At this moment, seeing this luxury limited edition sports car produced by Stark Industries with a full concept of the future, his eyes immediately lit up. "My king hail." Raven couldn't help but hugged Lancelot, and screamed like a little girl with longing eyes. Lancelot sits in the so-called future fantasy sports car. The ergonomic seat carefully designed by Stark Industry makes Lancelot feel more comfortable. The space inside the sports car is like a commercial vehicle, spacious and bright, with built-in various technological devices ahead of this era. Even the configuration of the top luxury sports car in the 21st century in the previous life, this sports car also has it, and it is even more advanced than the previous life. In particular, the intelligent driving system in the car highlights the technological sense of Stark Industry, which is something that can only be found in a place rich in black technology like Marvel. Boom! Raven excitedly started the sports car, the powerful engine system roared and vibrated, and then the two jet ports at the rear of the sports car sprayed out a dazzling and colorful airflow. "Cool!" Raven yelled excitedly again, and then kicked the accelerator directly, and the sports car galloped out like a cheetah. Its built-in suspension system and shock absorption system even made Raven in the car feel no vibration at all. As expected of a genius Stark, even Lancelot couldn't help praising him. In terms of technology, apart from the hidden Wakanda, Stark Industry is well-deserved no one. After the excitement, Raven set the autopilot in the car, and then came to Lancelot's side, nestled in Lancelot's arms, and stared at Lancelot with a pair of pale golden pupils. "My lord, I didn't realize that I was truly alive until I met you." Raven looked at Lancelot excitedly, and couldn't help but kissed Lancelot. As Raven said, until this time, she felt that she was truly alive, she didn't need to pretend, she didn't need to suppress herself, and she was even able to live a life that she never imagined as a mutant. Human respect, luxury living. Instead of hiding like a mouse crossing the street. The emotional Raven feels that only by dedicating his most perfect side to Lancelot can he express his inner emotions. The two played poker in the car. As far as Professor X and others in Moscow, they began to search for White Queen Emma. Because he was afraid of making a fool of himself, Professor X did not use his telepathy ability, but only gradually collected White Queen Emma's figure through Agent Mora's intelligence-gathering ability. "I've had enough, Charles." Inside a CIA agent's safe house, Magneto Eric roared at Professor X like a raging lion. He has been hiding in this safe house for 3 days, he doesn't want to wait anymore, he just wants to kill that general's manor now, and then use his mutant ability to find out the whereabouts of White Queen Emma. "Magneto, you shouldn't be so rude to Charles." Before Professor X could speak, Agent Mora spoke first. "Shut your mouth, woman." Magneto opened his right hand, and the metal necklace around Moira's neck suddenly floated in the air, and then directly wrapped around Moira's neck, tightening constantly. Eric, Eric, looking at Mola struggling in pain, Professor X yelled angrily, while pressing his right hand directly on his temple. Calm down, Eric. The voice of Professor X appeared in Magneto's mind, which made Magneto's face even colder, but he had to let go of Moira. Charles, if you still consider me a friend, make up your mind as soon as possible. Magneto snorted coldly, and then walked out of the room directly. Only Professor X was left in deep thought. He glanced at Mola apologetically, and then shook his head helplessly. Moira, Magneto was right, we don't have much time to waste. I have a bad feeling. 7 days passed by again. During these 7 days, Lancelot has been taking Raven with him to live a leisurely life. When he has nothing to do, he and Raven go to various high-end places to spend, and at night they just find a presidential suite to rest. With the backing of the entire CIA, Lancelot thoroughly enjoyed the capital life. And Raven also enjoyed a luxurious life of the upper class, and often followed Lancelot to high-end private receptions and private parties, and Raven seemed to fall in love with playing games, which made Lancelot feel the joy of owning Raven. Don't move, hand over your money. On this day, Lancelot, who was wandering with Raven, met a group of gangsters who didn't have eyes. At this moment, a black man with dreadlocks was holding a gun in his right hand, yelling at Lancelot arrogantly. The others, however, looked at Raven with blue skin and Lancelot's expensive, luxurious, and elegant robes. These gangsters only regarded Raven as a rich man's game. And no one would think of Mutant. In this era, until the existence of Mutant, there are really too few, even some top rich people, if they haven't seen it with their own eyes, they don't know the existence of Mutant. Cub, put down the gun. Lancelot looked at the gangster in front of him indifferently, and said in a cold tone. From Lancelot's eyes, a fiery red bird fluttered out. The dozen or so gangsters in front of him only felt in a trance, and then they were controlled by Lancelot's chaos. Crash! Everyone threw their guns on the ground, and then returned to normal. Huh, what's going on? Why did I throw the gun away? Joseph, the black man, muttered suspiciously at the moment, looking down at the pistol on the ground. The thought of picking up. The same is true for other gang members. Although they were puzzled by the fact that they threw away the guns in their hands, none of them had the idea of picking up the gun. Raven, I'll leave it to you. Lancelot glanced at the gangsters indifferently, and then ordered Raven. Yes, my king. Raven nodded, then moved his body slightly, shifted his center of gravity down, and assumed a fighting posture. For the past few days, Lancelot has been bringing Raven with him, and in his spare time, he will focus on training Raven's fighting ability. Raven's body flexibility has surpassed the limit of human beings, and his reaction speed is quick. With a little training, he is a full-fledged fighting master. Although Lancelot doesn't understand fighting, this does not prevent him from teaching Raven how to use his mutant ability to fight. Like a glance now, Raven's right hand clenched a fist, and as the blue scales on his right arm fluctuated like ocean waves, Raven's right arm turned into a thick, muscular arm. This is the arm of a heavyweight boxer in Virginia. Under the limit of one arm, it can exert a force of 800 kilograms, and even the usual fist weight is 500 kilograms. Whoosh! At this moment, Raven's entire body appeared in front of Joseph, a black burly man with incomparable flexibility, and his muscular right hand directly hit Joseph's body. Boom! A dull blow sounded, and Joseph's 1.9-meter body was immediately sent flying several meters away. At the same time, Raven's right hand returned to normal, and his feet transformed into the legs of a 100-meter sprint champion. Rushed into the gang group. Then Raven's body was as dexterous as a beautiful snake. Her weak and boneless body and super-fast reaction force allowed her to easily avoid the attacks of gangsters around her, and then her hands constantly changed into the musculoskeletal structure of a heavyweight boxer. Almost punched to the flesh, these gangsters were like sandbags, and they were directly knocked out by Raven. Not bad, 13 seconds 86. 3 seconds faster than last time. Lancelot stopped the timer in his hand and praised. My lord, thank you for your compliment, everything is under your guidance. Raven said with joy and gratitude on his face. After obtaining the variant ability of shapeshifting, Raven never really thought about how to develop his variant ability, but simply changed his appearance. Not just Raven, even Professor X Charles never thought deeply about Raven's shapeshifting. How exactly should ability be developed? After following Lancelot, Raven finally realized that his mutant ability still has unlimited potential. The first thing Lancelot taught Raven was the ability of mimic shapeshifting. The so-called mimic shapeshifting is to shapeshift a part of Raven's body to become the best limbs among human beings, or hands, or feet. Through mimic ability, let yourself obtain the strength, speed, reaction nerves, etc. of these people. What Raven used before was the ability of mimic shapeshifting. The second thing Lancelot taught Raven was awakening shapeshifting, also known as alienation shapeshifting. Use your own shapeshifting ability to transform part or all of your body into a special body alienation mutant, and thus obtain the ability of the alienation mutant. However, this form requires Raven to be in constant contact for a long time, and now she can only reach the level of mimic shapeshifting. At the same time, Lancelot also proposed some ideas that are very suitable for Raven's variant ability, such as adjusting the musculoskeletal muscles of the body to make oneself lighter, or increasing muscle density so that one's body can obtain unparalleled defense. Raven's mutant ability has unlimited possibilities. Even the pure human underworld Emperor Jin Bin can exercise his muscles enough to compete against Spider-Man and many other superheroes. As a mutant, he can naturally change his body structure at will. Mystique Raven should be able to do the same. Even, in Lancelot's conception, he also wants Raven to directly try the body structure of superhumans such as Captain America Steve Rogers. Think about it, the curvaceous Raven has the explosive power and recovery power of Captain America in his body. Raven will leap into a truly powerful level 5 mutant. However, it will take a long time to develop to that level. Holding Raven in his arms with his right hand, Lancelot trampled over them without looking at the gangsters under his feet. Humans are just cubs. It was my kindness that I didn't directly order them to commit suicide, so how could I care about the howls and screams of this group of human cubs? My lord, the mutant has been summoned. When Lancelot left the alleyway, a respectful voice sounded. A few CIA agents in black suits and sunglasses stood respectfully in front of Lancelot's sports car and spoke. Finally done. Come on, Raven, it's time for us to go back and meet our fellow mutants. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.